The ground is frozen hard before dawn, and the first light over the ancient world does not fall on villages, roads, temples, fields, or walls. It falls on a planet that has not yet learned the shape of civilization. A cold wind moves through open grassland, bends the dry stems, and carries the smell of wet stone, animal hides, distant smoke, and something dead beyond the ridge. There are no written names for this place. There are no borders, no kings, no calendars, no stories carved into clay. The humans moving through this landscape do not know they are living inside prehistory, because there is no history yet, not in the way later people will understand it. There is only weather, hunger, memory, danger, and the slow work of staying alive one more day. 1 million years ago, Earth is both familiar and deeply alien. The continents are in roughly recognizable positions. The stars wheel overhead in patterns that would still look known to modern eyes, and rivers cut through valleys much as rivers do now. But the world is colder, wilder, and more crowded with large animals. Ice advances and retreats in great pulses over the northern hemisphere. Sea levels rise and fall as water locks into glaciers and then returns to the oceans. Deserts breathe in and out, forests spread, shrink, and fracture. Grasslands widen into corridors where herds move like weather across the land. In this age, climate is not a background condition. Climate is the engine of survival, the force that opens routes, closes refuges, changes diets, isolates populations, and sometimes erases them. In this world before civilization, humanity is not a single thing. That may be the first great shock hidden in the deep past. There is no one human story yet, no single species standing alone at the center of the planet. Instead, there are multiple kinds of humans and human relatives. Some widespread, some local, some known from many fossils, others from only a few bones, and others perhaps still missing from the ground entirely. Homo erectus, already ancient by this time, has endured for hundreds of thousands of years across parts of Africa and Eurasia. In Europe and Western Asia, populations are moving along evolutionary paths that will eventually lead toward Neanderthals. In Asia, other branches are taking shape in ways scientists are still trying to untangle. And somewhere within this broad, complicated human landscape lie the ancestors of the Denisovans, a people who will later be known not from a proud city or a carved monument, but from fragments so small they almost vanish between the fingers. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the story of humanity 1 million years ago is not the story of primitive figures waiting passively for progress to arrive. It is the story of beings who already know landscapes intimately, who read tracks, seasons, storms, animal behavior, stone quality, edible plants, safe water, and the moods of fire. Their world has no agriculture, but it is not empty. It has no writing, but it is not without memory. It has no civilization, but it is full of decisions that mean life or death. To imagine life at this distance is difficult, partly because 1 million years is not merely old. It is almost beyond ordinary human feeling. The Roman Empire seems ancient, yet it sits almost against the present compared with this age. The pyramids are unimaginably old to most people, but 1 million years ago is nearly 200 times farther back than the building of the Great Pyramid. Even the first cities are late arrivals, brief flashes near the surface of time, farming, writing, metal, wheels, states, armies, money, and monuments all belong to the final thin edge of the human story. For most of our existence, and for the existence of our relatives before us, there is no civilization at all. There is only adaptation. What survives from that world is painfully incomplete. A stone hand axe here, a butchered bone there, a hearth that may or may not be intentional, a tooth in a cave, a skull fragment in river sediment, a layer of ash, a cut mark under a microscope, a protein trace, a genome reconstructed from the dust of a place where bodies decayed long before anyone could bury them with names. Scholars still debate many details, because the evidence remains incomplete and uneven. Some regions preserve fossils well, others destroy them. Some caves become time capsules. Open landscapes are often swept clean by wind, flood, root, and rain. Whole populations may have lived, struggled, migrated, mixed, and disappeared without leaving behind more than a few durable stones. Yet those stones matter. In the deep past, a shaped stone is not just an object. It is a brief interruption in geological silence. It says that a hand once selected a nodule from many others. It says that a mind anticipated an edge before the edge existed. It says that someone struck stone against stone with enough control to make a tool rather than rubble. 1,000,000 years ago, stone tools are already old technology. The Apulian tradition, famous for its hand axes and large cutting tools, has spread widely from its earlier origins. Some are rough and practical, others are surprisingly symmetrical, made with a precision that suggests more than mere accident. Their makers may not think as modern humans do, and no one should pretend we can enter their minds easily. But the tools show planning, skill, and repetition across generations. Knowledge is moving from body to body long before schools, books, or written instruction. The human body in this age is also being tested constantly. Walking upright is already ancient. Hands are free to carry food, stone, infants, and embers. Brains are larger than those of earlier apes, though not always like ours in structure or behavior. Teeth, jaws, brows, limbs, and skulls vary across populations. Some people are tall and long-legged, well suited to movement across open country. Others may be stockier in colder regions. The record suggests endurance, toughness, and physical intimacy with the land. These humans do not live apart from nature. They are inside it, watched by predators, followed by parasites, shaped by hunger, and forced to understand animals not as symbols, but as competitors, prey, threats, and sometimes opportunities. There is a common mistake in thinking about this world. It is easy to imagine life before civilization as simple, as if people merely wandered without purpose through empty wilderness. But the wilderness is not empty to those who must survive in it. It is dense with information. A broken branch may mean a heavy animal passed recently. A flock lifting suddenly from reeds may reveal a predator. A riverbank after rain may expose stones useful for cutting. A patch of tubers. A seasonal fruiting tree, a shellfish bed, a carcass abandoned by lions, a cliff that blocks the wind, a cave that stays dry, a spring that does not fail in the dry season. Each detail becomes part of a living map. What survives in the record suggests that these ancient humans are not masters of the world. But they are not helpless either. They endure because they notice. Their days are not organized by clocks, but by light, temperature, animal movement, and the condition of the body. Morning may mean searching for food before heat or cold becomes dangerous. Midday may mean processing a carcass, breaking bones for marrow, scraping hides, watching children, repairing tools, or moving toward water. Night may mean sheltering close together, especially if fire is present. But fire itself is one of the great uncertainties of this age. Evidence for controlled fire becomes stronger later in human prehistory, while earlier claims are often debated. By 1 million years ago, some human groups may use fire at least occasionally, perhaps by maintaining natural flames or controlling burning in limited ways. But no single explanation fully accounts for when reliable fire use became common across different regions. The difference between a group that can keep fire and one that cannot is immense. Fire changes food, warmth, predators, insects, darkness, and social life. But deep in this period, fire may still be uneven, precious, and uncertain. The planet around them is filled with animals that later ages will know only from bones and reconstructions. Depending on the region, there are ancient elephants, giant deer, wild horses, aurochs-like cattle, hyenas, big cats, bears, rhinoceroses, and many forms now gone. The relationship between humans and these animals is not the triumphant conquest often imagined in popular stories. It is more dangerous, more opportunistic, and more complex. Sometimes humans hunt. Sometimes they scavenge. Sometimes they are hunted. Sometimes they arrive after predators have opened a carcass. Sometimes they use stone tools to strip meat quickly before larger animals return. A cut mark on fossil bone may look small, but behind it is a tense scene, eyes scanning the horizon, hands moving fast, children kept back, the smell of blood in the air, the knowledge that meat is valuable and danger is never far away. Across this world, there are no cities to leave ruins, but there are places of repeated return, a cave mouth, a lake shore, a river terrace, a crossing point for herds, a ridge with good stone, a sheltered hollow where wind drops and sparks can be protected. Over time, layer by layer, such places become archives without intending to be. Bones accumulate, tools are lost or discarded, sediment buries footprints, ash, pollen, teeth, and microscopic traces. Later, much later, scientists will kneel in these layers and try to read them like pages from a book mostly burned away. They will argue over dates, species, technologies, migrations, and meanings. They will sometimes revise the entire story because of a fragment smaller than a coin. That is why 1 million years ago matters. It is not simply a dark background before the arrival of modern humans. It is the deep stage on which many human experiments are already underway. Bodies are adapting, populations are separating and reconnecting. Stone technologies are spreading. Ancient lineages are moving across continents. Some will give rise to later humans. Some will leave no descendants that can be easily named. Some, like the Denisovan-related populations of Asia, will remain almost invisible until new science learns how to detect them from scraps of bone and DNA. Their presence reminds us that the past is not only what has been found, it is also what has not yet been found, what may never be found, and what still waits in caves, sediments, and living genomes. The first light has now widened over the ancient plain. The group moves, not as a symbol of progress, not as a primitive version of ourselves, but as people of their own world, carrying knowledge that will never be written down. Behind them, the night fades from the rocks. Ahead of them, the day opens with all its hunger and possibility. They do not know that civilization will one day rise and cover the earth with noise. They do not know that their bones, tools, and vanished relatives will become mysteries for distant descendants. They know only the slope of the land, the direction of the wind, the memory of water, and the need to keep going. Far from the open plain, high in the Altai mountains of southern Siberia, a cave waits above a river valley. Its entrance is not grand in the way ancient ruins are grand. It has no carved gate, no pillars, no painted procession of kings. It is a hollow in limestone, looking out towards slopes of forest and steppe, where cold air moves down from the mountains and the seasons can turn quickly. Snow gathers outside it, summer grasses return, animals pass through the valley, humans come and go, not once, but again and again, across immense stretches of time. The place will later be called Denisova Cave, and for most of human history it will hold its secrets quietly, layer beneath layer, as if the ground itself has chosen to remember what people could not. The cave sits in a region that has always been a kind of crossroads. The Altai is not merely remote wilderness. It lies between worlds, between the open spaces of Central Asia, the cold north, the mountain corridors, the forests, the steppes, and the routes leading deeper into Eurasia. For ancient humans, such places matter. They are not just shelters. They are observation points, resting places, seasonal stations, and anchors in a landscape where survival depends on knowing where water, stone, animals, and refuge can be found. A cave with a dry interior and a commanding view over a valley is never only a cave. It is a possible home, a workshop, a lookout, a memory trap. Long before anyone gives the cave a modern name, human relatives use it. Neanderthals enter, Denisovans enter. Later, modern humans may pass through the region as well. Animals use it too. Hyenas, bears, birds, rodents, and other creatures leave traces that complicate the story. The floor becomes a layered archive, not a neat record written for scientists, but a crowded mixture of occupations, abandonments, disturbances, climate shifts, animal activity, and slow burial. Some layers preserve stone tools, others preserve bone fragments. Some preserve almost nothing visible to the naked eye, yet still hold genetic traces in the sediment itself. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives is enough to turn this cave into one of the most important places in the study of human origins. For a long time, the deep human past is built mostly from bones and tools. Fossils provide skulls, jaws, teeth, limb bones, and fragments of anatomy. Stone tools provide patterns of behavior, movement, and skill. This record is powerful, but it has limits. A skull can tell something about shape, but not always about ancestry. A tool can show technique, but not always the species that made it. A cave layer can show occupation, but not always who was there. Before ancient DNA changes the field, many extinct human groups remain visible only where the body leaves enough behind to be recognized. If a population is rare in the fossil record, or if its bones are fragmentary, it can disappear from scientific sight almost completely. Denisova Cave breaks that pattern. Its most famous discovery is not a skeleton arranged in dramatic form. It is not a skull staring from the sediment with heavy brows and a complete jaw. It is a tiny finger bone, a small piece of a child's hand, found in 2008. At first glance, it does not look like something that could rewrite the human story. It is modest, almost anonymous, the kind of fragment that in another era might have been catalogued, stored, and nearly forgotten. But inside that small bone remains genetic information, and that information carries a shock. When researchers study its mitochondrial DNA, it does not fit neatly with modern humans. It does not fit with Neanderthals either. It points to a separate lineage, related but distinct, a branch of humanity that had been living somewhere in Eurasia without a recognized face in the fossil record. The child from that bone is often described as a Denisovan, after the cave that preserved her trace. Yet even that name is a modern convenience. No one knows what these people called themselves, whether they had names for their groups, their valleys, their dead, their stories, or their enemies. The word Denisovan comes from a place, and the place itself takes its modern name from a later figure associated with the cave, long after the ancient humans were gone. This is one of the strange ironies of prehistory. A vast human lineage becomes known to the modern world through a name borrowed from a cave, and a cave name borrowed from recent memory. The people themselves remain silent. What makes the discovery so powerful is not only that it adds another human group to the map, it changes the way scientists understand the map itself. Before this, Neanderthals had already complicated the old idea that modern humans simply replaced all other forms without much contact. Genetic research was beginning to reveal interbreeding between Neanderthals and ancestors of some living people. But Denisovans make the picture stranger and wider. Here is a group that is not clearly known from a complete fossil body, yet its DNA reveals that it existed, that it separated from the lineage related to Neanderthals, that it interbred with both Neanderthals and modern humans, and that some of its ancestry still survives in people today. A few physical traces follow. Teeth from Denisova Cave are unusually large, larger than expected for many later humans, and they hint at a population with archaic features. A jawbone found far away on the Tibetan plateau, identified through ancient proteins rather than full DNA, later becomes linked to Denisovan ancestry, suggesting that Denisovan-related people may have lived not only in Siberian cave environments, but also in extremely high-altitude landscapes. Sediment DNA from cave deposits adds another layer, showing that genetic traces can survive even when bones do not. In a sense, the cave floor begins to speak without bodies. Dust, minerals, and tiny scraps of organic material preserve evidence of presence after the people themselves have vanished. This is a lesser-known revolution, but it is one of the most important. Archaeology once depended heavily on what could be seen, measured, held, and drawn. Now, invisible molecules can expose occupants who left no recognizable bones behind. A scoop of sediment from a cave layer can contain genetic signals from humans and animals that passed through thousands of years apart. This does not make the work simple. Contamination is a danger. Layers can shift. Dating can be complex. Genetic fragments can be damaged, sparse, and difficult to interpret. Scholars still debate how to connect specific tools, behaviors, and cultural traces to specific human groups when several kinds of humans may have occupied the same site at different times. But the possibility itself changes everything. The past is no longer limited to the fossils large enough to survive. Denisova Cave also reveals that ancient human worlds overlapped. The cave is not a single-species monument, it is more like a long-used shelter at the edge of many ranges, occupied at different times by different humans whose histories cross without leaving clear stories. Neanderthals are present in the genetic record. Denisovans are present. There is even evidence from a bone fragment of a young individual whose mother was Neanderthal and whose father was Denisovan. A direct sign that these groups did not merely live in separate worlds. They met, they mixed. Their boundaries, which may seem sharp in scientific diagrams, were sometimes porous in life. That single fact makes the cave feel less like a museum case and more like a human place. Across deep time, fires may have burned near its mouth, stone may have been struck there, meat may have been cut, children may have watched adults work, Injured people may have rested in its shelter. Groups may have arrived after long movements through the valley and left again when seasons changed. No one can reconstruct these moments in full. And it would be wrong to pretend certainty where the evidence remains fragmentary. But the cave preserves enough to suggest repeated presence, practical use, and a landscape important enough for multiple human lineages to return. The true power of Denisova Cave is that it turns absence into evidence. It shows that an entire population can be almost invisible in bones and still leave a genetic shadow across continents. It shows that the human family tree is not a clean ladder, not a simple march toward us, but a braided system of separations, reunions, migrations, and disappearances. It shows that 1 million years ago, the world was already preparing the conditions for later mysteries lineages moving apart, adapting to different regions, carrying inheritances that would surface only after science learned how to read the dead. Outside the cave, the Altai landscape keeps changing. Glaciers advance in distant ranges, forests shift, cold steppe opens and closes, animals follow the rhythms of climate, human groups arrive, endure, and leave. The cave remains, patient and indifferent, gathering dust over secrets too small to notice. A tooth falls, a bone breaks, sediment covers a trace of DNA. For tens of thousands of years, nothing announces that these scraps matter. Then, in the hands of modern researchers, a fragment from a child's finger becomes a doorway, and beyond that doorway stands a lost humanity that had been there all along. The cave in the Altai gives the story a doorway, but the world beyond that doorway is much larger than one site, one valley, or one lost lineage. To understand humanity 1 million years ago, it is necessary to let go of the familiar picture of a single human species advancing alone through time. The ancient world is not a narrow road leading directly to modern people. It is closer to a wide, shifting delta where streams split, rejoin, dry out, or vanish underground. Some branches leave fossils in caves and riverbeds. Some leave tools across open landscapes. Some leave only genetic traces that will not be noticed until hundreds of thousands of years later. Others may have existed without leaving enough evidence to be named at all. At this distance, even the word humanity becomes complicated. Modern humans do not yet exist. Homo sapiens will appear much later, after long evolutionary changes in Africa. Neanderthals, in the classic form recognized from later Ice Age Europe and Western Asia, are also not yet fully present 1 million years ago. Denisovans, as a distinct population known from later genetic evidence, belong to a later chapter as well. But their deeper ancestry is already unfolding somewhere in the broad human world. The roots are there before the names, the lineages that will eventually produce Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans are beginning to separate, merge, and reshape themselves under pressure from climate, distance, isolation, and contact. One of the most enduring figures in this older world is Homo erectus. By 1 million years ago, Homo erectus is already a survivor of extraordinary duration. Its story begins much earlier, and its range stretches across parts of Africa and Eurasia. In some regions, Homo erectus or closely related forms have been living for hundreds of thousands of years before the age now being imagined. They walk upright with bodies that can look surprisingly familiar from the neck down, long legs. Efficient movement, a capacity for travel across large territories. Their brains are smaller than those of later humans, their skulls lower and more heavily built, their brow ridges prominent, their jaws and teeth shaped by older patterns. But they are not crude failures waiting to be replaced. They are one of the great successful experiments of the human family. Their success lies partly in endurance. Homo erectus lives through changing climates, crosses ecological boundaries, uses stone tools, exploits meat and plants, and adapts to landscapes far beyond the forests and savannas of earlier ancestry. In popular imagination, ancient human species often appear briefly, like stepping stones. In reality, some endure far longer than most civilizations ever will. Homo erectus persists across a span so vast that the entire rise and fall of every empire known to written history would barely disturb the surface of it. The evidence remains incomplete in many areas, and scholars still debate exactly how to classify certain fossils. But the broad pattern is clear by 1 million years ago. Homo erectus and related populations have already made human life a continental phenomenon. Europe is also occupied, though the identity of its early humans is more difficult to define. Fossils from sites such as Atapuerca in Spain point to ancient populations living in Western Europe before the classic Neanderthals. Some have been assigned to Homo antecessor, though its place in the family tree remains debated. Later, other Middle Pleistocene humans in Europe show features that seem to lead toward Neanderthals. This is not a clean transformation from one named species to another. It is a slow regional process, with populations changing over time, sometimes isolated by climate, sometimes connected by migration, sometimes known only from fragments. The bones show faces, teeth, skulls, and bodies in transition, but they do not provide a simple map. In Africa, other archaic human populations are also evolving. The deep roots of Homo sapiens lie there, but 1 million years ago those roots have not yet taken their modern form. African fossils from later periods will reveal a mosaic, some traits that seem closer to modern humans, others that remain archaic. This mosaic matters because evolution does not work like an artist finishing one statue at a time. It works through populations, variation, survival, reproduction, and chance. A skull may have a modern-looking face and an archaic brain case, or a mixture of traits that resists easy naming. No single fossil stands as the obvious moment when us begins. The beginning is spread across time, landscape, and population. Asia may be even more complex. Homo erectus is present in East and Southeast Asia, but there may also be other human forms whose relationships are still uncertain. Some later discoveries, from small-bodied humans on islands to unusual archaic fossils on the mainland, suggest that Asia was not merely a distant edge of human evolution. It may have been a vast human laboratory, full of lineages separated by mountains, forests, deserts, islands, and shifting sea levels. The ancestors of Denisovans belong somewhere within this broad Eurasian complexity. They are not yet visible as a clearly defined people 1 million years ago, but the populations that will later become Denisovan-related are part of a deeper division among archaic humans. That division will only become obvious when DNA begins to reveal what bones alone could not. The family tree, then, is not really a tree if that word suggests neat branches growing apart forever. It is better imagined as a braided river. Populations split when climate or distance separates them. They change in different regions. They meet again when conditions allow movement. They exchange genes. They separate once more. Some branches shrink into isolation. Others expand across huge territories. This pattern becomes especially important later, when Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans interbreed. But the habit of mixture is not a strange exception to human evolution. It may be one of its recurring features. Boundaries between ancient human groups can be real in evolutionary terms and still porous in life. This is one reason the old ladder of progress has collapsed. For a long time, Human evolution was often pictured as a sequence ape-like ancestor, then primitive human, then better human, then modern human, as if every earlier form existed only to become the next. That image is tidy, memorable, and deeply misleading. 1 million years ago, there is no single staircase. There are many populations, each adapted to its own world, each facing its own pressures. Some are closer to the ancestry of modern humans. Some are side branches. Some may be cousins whose exact relationship remains unresolved. Some may be known from fossils that do not fit comfortably into any category. The past refuses to arrange itself for convenience. This also matters when people imagine lost advanced civilizations in the deep past. The temptation is understandable. 1 million years is a vast empty space for the imagination, and absence can feel like an invitation. But the archaeological record does not support cities, writing systems, metallurgy, monumental architecture, agriculture, or industrial societies at this depth in time. What it does show is impressive in a different way: long-lasting stone technologies, ecological intelligence, repeated survival under harsh conditions, and human relatives capable of occupying large parts of the old world without leaving the kind of traces civilization leaves. If a city existed, it would not only leave one mysterious object, it would leave layers of infrastructure, waste, extraction, settlement, tools, altered landscapes, and durable patterns. The evidence for 1 million years ago points instead to mobile or semi-mobile foraging lives, not hidden empires. And yet this does not make the period small. It makes it more profound. These humans live without the protections later people take for granted. No stored grain shelters them from failed seasons. No writing preserves instructions when elders die. No domestic animals pull loads or stand in pens. No roads guarantee return. Every group carries its survival inside bodies, habits, gestures, memory, and shared attention. Children learn by watching. Adults read the land because mistakes are expensive. The line between knowledge and instinct is not easily drawn, but what survives in the record suggests repeated choices, not random wandering. The ancient world is therefore crowded, but not crowded in a modern sense. Human population numbers are likely low by later standards, scattered across enormous territories. Groups may go long periods without encountering unfamiliar people. In other places, river valleys, coastlines, migration corridors, and rich hunting grounds may bring different groups into contact. Some contacts may be brief and cautious. Some may be violent. Some may involve exchange, mating, following, avoidance, or simple awareness of others through abandoned tools and footprints. No one can reconstruct these encounters with certainty. Still, the later genetic evidence of mixture warns against imagining ancient groups as sealed containers. They are separate enough to evolve distinct traits, but not always separate enough to remain untouched. 1 million years ago, the human story is already plural. There are bodies moving through Africa, Europe, and Asia with different histories behind their faces. There are tool traditions that spread and persist. There are populations that will contribute to later lineages and populations that will vanish completely. There are ancestors of ancestors, people not yet Denisovan, not yet Neanderthal, not yet modern human, but already part of the long preparation for all three. The world has no civilization, but it has many humanities. Some will leave names given by science, some will leave only problems, some will leave traces in the genomes of people who will never see the caves and valleys where those traces began. The sun over this older world does not rise on a single chosen species. It rises on a family in motion, divided and connected, inventive and vulnerable, ancient beyond easy comprehension. Somewhere, a Homo erectus group moves along a river with tools carried from a distant source. Somewhere else, early European humans shelter against cold winds at the edge of a changing forest. In Africa, populations continue to evolve in ways that will one day lead toward modern humanity. In Asia, unknown branches take shape in landscapes where the evidence is still thin. The story is already too large for one name, and the silence around it is not emptiness. It is the silence of many lives lived before memory learned how to speak. The many humanities of 1 million years ago do not exist as ideas first. They exist as bodies that climb, carry, kneel, run, freeze, overheat, bleed, heal, and break. Long before any lineage can be named with confidence, anatomy is already recording the pressures of the world. The ancient human body is a compromise between movement and strength, endurance and injury, intelligence and hunger. It must travel across rough ground without shoes, process tough food without metal knives, sleep under threat without walls, and raise children in landscapes where a careless sound, a bad season, or a swollen river can decide the future of an entire group. The fossil record does not give a full portrait. It gives pieces: a skull vault here, a jaw there, a tooth worn down by years of chewing, a femur thick enough to suggest powerful muscles, a pelvis hinting at posture, a hand bone shaped by gripping and tool use. From such fragments, scientists try to reconstruct beings who are neither animals in the ordinary sense nor modern people in disguise. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how to classify many Middle Pleistocene fossils. But one pattern appears again and again. Ancient humans are physically demanding creatures, shaped by worlds that require toughness as a daily condition rather than an occasional virtue. By 1 million years ago, upright walking has long since transformed the human lineage. These bodies move on 2 legs not as an experiment, but as an established way of life. The spine, pelvis, knees, feet, and balance of the body all carry the history of walking and running across distance. Long legs matter, freed hands matter. A group that can move efficiently can follow water, track animals, escape local shortages, carry tools, transport infants, and explore beyond familiar ground. In open landscapes, endurance may be more valuable than sudden speed. Humans are not the fastest animals on the plain. They're not the strongest. They survive through persistence, cooperation, memory, and the ability to make the body work with the mind. The skulls of these ancient humans often look heavy to modern eyes. Brow ridges can be thick, faces can project forward, brain cases can be long and low, jaws may be powerful, teeth large, chewing muscles strong. But heavy does not mean stupid, and archaic does not mean simple. The brain has already expanded greatly compared with earlier ancestors, and the relationship between brain size and behavior is not a straight line. A larger brain does not automatically create language, art, or civilization. A smaller brain does not mean a creature cannot plan, learn, recognize, remember, or teach. What survives in the record suggests practical intelligence under pressure, choosing stone, making tools, locating carcasses, returning to useful places, and adapting across varied environments. One of the lesser-known difficulties in this story is that anatomy does not always divide neatly into species. Fossils can contain a mosaic of traits. A face may look surprisingly modern in one feature and deeply archaic in another. A jaw may resemble one known group, while the teeth suggest another. A skull from one region may not fit the pattern expected from another. This is especially true across the Middle Pleistocene. The broad period surrounding 1 million to several 100,000 years ago, when many later human lineages are taking shape but not yet sharply defined. The categories used by scientists are necessary, but the bodies themselves often resist clean borders. This matters for Denisovan origins because Denisovans are, in a strange way, a people first recognized almost without a body. Their identity is genetic before it is anatomical. Later evidence from Denisova Cave and the Tibetan Plateau gives scientists teeth, a finger bone, a jaw, and molecular clues. But there is still no complete Denisovan skeleton, no full skull that can be held up as the face of the people. Because of this, the bodies of Denisovan ancestors 1 million years ago remain difficult to picture. They likely emerge from broader archaic Eurasian populations related to the ancestors of Neanderthals. But exactly how their bodies look across time and region remains uncertain. No single fossil yet allows scholars to say, with full confidence, this is what a Denisovan looked like. Still, the clues are suggestive. Some Denisovan-associated teeth are unusually large, a detail that seems small until one remembers how much information teeth can hold. Teeth are among the most durable parts of the body. They preserve shape, growth patterns, wear, diet, and sometimes genetic or protein evidence. Large molars can hint at archaic ancestry, diet, developmental history, and evolutionary distance, though they cannot alone define a whole people. The Xiahi jaw from the Tibetan Plateau, linked to Denisovan ancestry through protein evidence, suggests a robust lower face and a presence in high-altitude environments. That detail becomes startling because it places Denisovan-related humans not only in Siberian cave country, but also in one of the most physically challenging landscapes on Earth. High altitude is not simply scenery, it is stress made invisible. Air carries less oxygen, cold bites harder, ultraviolet radiation is stronger. Growing bodies, pregnancies, movement, and survival all become more difficult. Later modern Tibetan populations carry a version of a gene associated with high-altitude adaptation that appears to come from Denisovan ancestry. This does not mean Denisovans were born as mountain specialists from the beginning, and it does not prove that every Denisovan group lived at altitude. The evidence is more careful than that, but it does suggest that at least some Denisovan-related populations carried biological tools for harsh environments, and those tools could become part of modern human survival long after the original groups were gone. Elsewhere, other ancient humans show different bodily solutions. Neanderthal ancestors in Europe gradually moved toward a body plan often associated with cold, adaptation, stockier builds, powerful trunks, shorter limb proportions in later forms, large noses and faces debated in relation to climate and breathing, and extraordinary muscular strength. Homo erectus, by contrast, often appears more long-limbed and suited to distance movement in warmer or more open environments. Though regional variation complicates the picture, early African populations that eventually contribute to Homo sapiens develop their own mosaic of traits, with changes in skull shape, face, and brain organization emerging over time. Human evolution is not one body becoming better. It is many bodies being tested against different worlds. The hands are among the most important parts of this story. 1 million years ago, hands are not merely for grasping branches or food, they select stone, strike flakes, hold cutting edges, scrape hides, break bones, carry infants, gesture, and perhaps communicate in ways that leave no fossil trace. A stone tool is the visible partner of an invisible hand. The precision needed to make a useful edge depends on grip, coordination, attention, and learned movement. Repetition over generations means bodies are trained as well as born. A child watching an adult shape stone is not only seeing a task, the child is absorbing a tradition through posture, rhythm, and correction that may never be spoken in words. The feet matter just as much, though they rarely receive the same attention. Ancient humans live on their feet. They cross sharp ground, mud, snow, sand, thorny scrub, river stones, and frozen soil. Injury is a constant threat. A broken leg can become a death sentence if the group cannot support the injured. A bad infection can undo years of survival. Yet some ancient fossils show signs of healed injuries, implying that care may sometimes extend beyond immediate usefulness. No one should romanticize the deep past as gentle, but neither should it be imagined as pure brutality. The body carries evidence not only of violence and hardship, but sometimes of survival after damage. The face of 1 million years ago is harder to enter emotionally because it is not fully ours. Heavy brows and projecting jaws can create distance in the imagination, but the face is also where eyes scan the horizon, where expressions move through a group, where children recognize safety, where attention is shared. Whether or not these humans have language in a modern sense remains debated, and the evidence cannot easily answer the question. They may communicate through vocal calls, gestures, expressions, learned signals, and perhaps more complex systems in some lineages. What can be said with more confidence is that group life requires coordination. Hunting, scavenging, childcare, movement, danger response, and tool learning all become easier when bodies can read one another. The ancient body is also expensive. Brains require energy. Childhood requires protection. Walking long distances burns calories. Pregnancy, birth, and nursing demand resources. A group can only support such bodies if it can regularly solve the problem of food, meat, marrow, plants, roots, seeds, eggs, shellfish where available, insects, and seasonal resources all may matter depending on region. There is no single prehistoric diet. The body 1 million years ago is not shaped by a menu, but by flexibility, the ability to eat many things, move between habitats, and exploit opportunity may be one of humanity's oldest strengths. So the people of this age stand in the cold morning with bodies both alien and recognizable. They are not yet modern. Some belong to lineages that will vanish. Some belong to ancestry that will flow into later populations. Some may be cousins whose names science has not yet learned. Their bones are thick with labour. Their teeth remember hard food. Their hands hold stone. Their feet know distance. Their faces are turned toward weather, animals, and one another. Civilization is still unimaginably far away, but the essential drama is already present: vulnerable bodies in a dangerous world, made powerful not by dominance, but by adaptation. The body can carry a lineage through time, but the body alone is not enough. 1 million years ago, survival depends on a partnership between flesh, memory, landscape, and material. Stone becomes tooth, wood becomes reach, bone becomes hammer, wedge, or container of marrow. Fire, where it can be made or kept, becomes a small sun carried against night. Nothing about this world is convenient. Every useful thing has to be found, recognized, shaped, guarded, transported, repaired, or remembered. The people moving through it do not own much, at least not in the way later people understand possession, but what they know how to use is the difference between a brief life and a lineage that lasts. stone is the most visible part of that knowledge because stone endures after almost everything else is gone. Flesh rots, wood decays, skin disappears, plant fibers vanish, and footprints are erased unless the conditions are unusually kind. But stone remains. It lies in river gravels, cave floors, ancient lake margins, and buried terraces, still carrying the scars of impact long after the hands that struck it have become dust. A stone tool from this age can look simple to an untrained eye. Yet it is not a random broken rock. It has a pattern. A useful edge has been imagined before it appears. A core has been turned, struck, adjusted, and reduced. A flake has been chosen because it can cut. A hand axe has been shaped with repeated blows, sometimes so carefully that its symmetry still startles the modern eye. The Acheulean tradition, already widespread by this time, is one of the great technologies of the early human world. Its hand axes, cleavers, and large cutting tools appear across immense distances and long spans of time. They're not identical everywhere, and scholars still debate what their variation means, but they show a durability of practice that is almost impossible to grasp. Later civilizations rise and fall in a few thousand years. Some stone tool traditions endure for hundreds of thousands. That endurance is not stagnation in any simple sense. It may reflect tools that work well enough to be taught, repeated, and carried through changing worlds. A good cutting edge does not need to be glamorous. It needs to open hide, slice meat, cut plant material, shape wood, or scrape. In this age, practical success is its own kind of genius. To make a tool, ancient humans need stone of the right quality. Not every rock will do. Some fracture unpredictably, some crumble, some are too soft, too coarse, too stubborn, flint, chert, quartzite, obsidian in some places, and other fine-grained stones can produce sharp edges, but they are not always available where a group happens to be. This means the landscape is also a map of raw material. A riverbed may be remembered for good cobbles, a cliff face may provide nodules. A distant source may be worth visiting again and again. When archaeologists find stone carried away from its geological origin, they glimpse ancient movement and planning. The distance between source and tool is a shadow of a journey. Once made, a tool enters daily life. It cuts through skin, it slices meat from bone, it breaks joints, it scrapes hides that might later help with warmth or carrying. It works wood into points or digging sticks. Though wooden tools rarely survive from this deep time, it cracks long bones to reach marrow, one of the richest prizes in a carcass. Marrow is fat, and fat is energy, especially in cold or difficult seasons. A broken bone at an ancient site can be more than debris. Under the right conditions, it can show impact marks, cut marks, and patterns of processing that reveal how carefully humans extracted calories from an animal body. Hunger teaches efficiency. Food is never one thing. The popular image of early humans as constant hunters of giant beasts is too simple. Hunting likely happens, but so does scavenging, gathering, digging, cracking, searching, and waiting. Meat is important, but plants are not background scenery. Roots, tubers, fruits, seeds, nuts, leaves, and seasonal foods may form crucial parts of the diet, depending on region and climate. In coastal or lakeside areas, shellfish, fish, eggs, and aquatic resources may be available. Though preservation varies greatly, insects and small animals may matter more than dramatic reconstructions usually admit. The evidence remains incomplete because plant foods often leave fewer visible traces than butchered bones. But what survives in the record suggests flexibility rather than a single heroic strategy. Scavenging, when it happens, is not cowardice. It is intelligence under pressure. A carcass is a temporary treasure in a dangerous place. Lions, hyenas, big cats, wolves, bears, vultures, and other animals understand its value too. Humans arriving at a carcass must judge timing, risk, and opportunity. If large predators have eaten first, stone tools can still remove meat from difficult places. Heavy stones can break bones that teeth have not opened. If humans arrive early, they may need to work quickly before competitors return. A cut mark beneath a microscope may preserve the edge of such a moment. It is small evidence for a large tension hands moving fast, eyes watching the grass, the smell of blood, the knowledge that food and death often stand close together. Fire changes this relationship, but fire at 1 million years ago remains one of the most debated parts of the story. There are early claims for controlled fire in several parts of the Old World, and some evidence suggests ancient humans may have used fire before this period or around it. Yet the regular, habitual, widespread control of fire becomes clearer later, and scholars still debate how often early humans could make it, maintain it, or depend on it. This uncertainty matters. Fire is not just a tool, it is a transformation of the night. It gives warmth in cold regions, light after sunset, protection from some predators, smoke against insects, a way to cook food, and a center around which social life can deepen. But if fire is rare or difficult to control, then it is also fragile. A burning branch from a natural wildfire may be precious. Embers may need to be protected in ash. A group may carry fire only when conditions allow. No single explanation fully accounts for the patchy evidence across regions. Cooking, if available, changes food before it reaches the mouth. It softens tough plants, makes some food safer, releases more energy from certain resources, and reduces chewing demands. But where fire is unreliable, ancient humans must still handle raw or minimally processed foods with teeth, tools, pounding, drying, and selection. The body and toolkit respond together. Strong jaws and worn teeth speak of difficult diets. Stone flakes speak of cutting outside the mouth. Fire, when present, begins to move some of the work of digestion into the landscape itself, turning heat into a silent partner of the body. Shelter is equally varied. The cave is powerful in the modern imagination, but most ancient life likely unfolds outside caves. Caves preserve evidence because they protect it, not because every human group lives permanently inside them. People may use rock shelters, tree cover, windbreaks, river terraces, lake shores, and temporary camps. They may build simple structures from branches, hides, grass, or bones in some situations. Though the evidence for such things this far back is rare and often difficult to interpret, a place of rest does not need to be a house. It needs to reduce exposure, allow watchfulness, hold warmth if fire is present, and offer access to water and food. The first shelters are not architecture as later people know it. They are decisions made against weather. Group life is the invisible structure holding all of this together. A lone human in this world is vulnerable. A group can watch in several directions, share food, protect young, learn from elders, and recover from individual failure. Children are especially important and especially costly. They cannot simply be left behind. They must be carried, fed, defended, taught, and tolerated through long dependence. That dependence may be one of the engines of human social life. Knowledge has to pass slowly into young bodies where to walk, what to fear, how to hold stone, when to stay quiet, which plants can be eaten, where water remains during dryness, how close one can move toward a carcass before danger becomes foolish. There is no school, but there is teaching, no writing, but there is memory, no law, but there are expectations, no market, but there may be sharing, tension, obligation, and conflict. The archaeological record rarely captures these social details directly, and it would be reckless to describe them with certainty. Yet the demands of survival make some form of coordination unavoidable. Tools do not persist across generations without learning. Long childhoods do not succeed without care. Repeated occupation of useful places does not happen without memory held by more than one mind. What survives in stone and bone points toward what does not survive attention, imitation, patience, and the constant negotiation of a life together. By evening, the group gathers what the day has allowed. Perhaps there is meat, perhaps only roots and hard seeds, perhaps nothing enough. A tool is resharpened, a child sleeps against an older body. Someone watches the dark beyond the shelter. If fire burns, it throws a small circle of light against a vast night. If it does not, the group must endure the darkness by closeness, caution, and experience. Civilization is still far beyond the horizon, but the foundations of human persistence are already here, not monuments, not myths written in temples, not fields of grain, but stone edges, shared food, remembered paths, protected children, and the stubborn refusal of a fragile species to disappear. The world of 1 million years ago is not small. It only seems small when the surviving evidence is reduced to a few caves, a few river terraces, a few famous skulls, and a scattered trail of stone. For the people living inside it, the world is vast beyond measure. It stretches farther than any one group can imagine. Over mountains they will never cross, forests they will never name, deserts that shift with climate, river systems that open like roads, and coastlines that appear and disappear as ice locks water away from the sea. Humanity before civilization is not fixed in one place. It moves, slowly, unevenly, generation by generation, sometimes by intention, sometimes by necessity, and sometimes simply because the animals' seasons and water move first. Asia is the great labyrinth in this story. It is not a single landscape, and it never was. It contains cold steppe, high mountains, deep forests, monsoon regions, dry basins, broad river valleys, plateaus, caves, islands, and shorelines that change shape when sea levels fall. A population entering one part of Asia does not enter all of Asia. It may follow a grassland corridor and never see tropical forest. It may live along a river for centuries and never cross the mountains beyond it. It may become trapped by desert, ice, sea, or distance. The continent does not simply receive ancient humans, it divides them, tests them, hides them, and sometimes preserves only the faintest trace of their passing. By 1 million years ago, human relatives have already reached far into Eurasia. Homo erectus and related forms are present in parts of Asia, long before the later rise of modern humans. Their movement did not happen as one heroic migration with a clear beginning and end. It likely unfolded in pulses, pauses, local expansions, retreats, and replacements. Climate opens roots and closes them again. A wet period may turn dry land into usable grassland with lakes and rivers. A colder phase may lower sea levels and expose shelves that connect places otherwise separated by water. A harsher interval may empty a region or compress people into refuges where food remains possible. Movement is not an adventure in the modern sense. It is a response to pressure. River valleys may be among the oldest guides. Water gathers animals, plants, stone, and humans into the same corridors. A river offers drinking water, fish in some places, reeds, trees, floodplain plants, and exposed gravel where useful stone can be found. It also cuts paths through difficult terrain. A group following a river is not drawing a map, but it is moving through a natural system of direction. In dry regions, rivers and lakes become even more important. In cold regions, valleys may offer shelter from wind or routes through mountains. The map of ancient human movement is therefore not a map of roads, it is a map of necessities. The ancestors of Denisovans belong somewhere in this immense geography. The evidence does not allow a simple statement that they began in one exact place and spread in one clean direction. What can be said is that Denisovan-related ancestry later appears across an extraordinary range of implications. Siberia through DNA from Denisova cave, the Tibetan plateau through protein evidence from a jaw, and living genetic traces in some present-day populations of Asia and Oceania. This does not mean every place with Denisovan ancestry was occupied by the same community, or at the same time. It suggests something broader and more difficult to picture Denisovan-related populations, or populations carrying Denisovan-like ancestry, may once have been spread across large parts of Asia, far beyond the tiny fossil record that currently defines them. That gap between range and remains is one of the great puzzles. If Denisovan ancestry reaches so far in living genomes, why are their physical remains so few? Part of the answer is preservation. Bones do not survive equally in all climates. Tropical forests are especially harsh on ancient DNA and often on bone preservation. Acid soils, heat, moisture, scavengers, erosion, and time erase bodies quickly. Caves preserve better. But not every group lives in caves. And not every cave has been excavated. Some regions that may have been crucial to Denisovan history are archaeologically difficult, politically complicated, underwater because of sea level rise, or simply underexplored. The evidence remains incomplete, not necessarily because the people were rare everywhere, but because the ground has not kept their story evenly. Southeast Asia adds another layer of complexity. During colder periods, lower sea levels expose land across what is now the Sunda Shelf, connecting parts of mainland Southeast Asia with islands such as Borneo, Sumatra, and Java. Farther east, deep water gaps remain difficult barriers, but coastlines, islands, and marine resources create different possibilities for movement. Later, modern humans will move into Sahel, the combined Ice Age landmass of Australia and New Guinea, carrying Denisovan ancestry in some populations at notable levels. This has led scholars to consider whether encounters with Denisovan-related groups occurred somewhere in Asia before those ancestors crossed into Sahul, or perhaps across a broader region of island Southeast Asia. The exact geography remains debated, but the genetic signal is difficult to ignore. The idea of Asia as a human labyrinth also helps explain why ancient populations could become different from one another without needing total isolation forever. Mountains can separate. Forests can slow movement. Deserts can block passage for long periods. Glacial cycles can shift habitable zones north and south, but barriers are not permanent walls. A dry basin may become passable during a wetter period. A cold steppe may open a route between regions. Sea levels may expose new land. Groups separated for thousands of years may meet again when climate changes. Over time, this produces the braided pattern of human evolution separation, adaptation, contact, mixture, and separation again. In this kind of world, a lineage can become both local and widespread. A Denisovan-related group living in a Siberian cave environment may not look, behave, or live exactly like a related group farther south or east. The name Denisovan can make them seem like one uniform people, but the reality was likely more varied. They may have included multiple populations spread across different ecological zones, perhaps as different from one another in some ways as later Neanderthal groups were across Europe and Western Asia. The fossil record is too sparse to show that variation clearly. Ancient DNA gives the outline of a hidden presence, but not yet the full human texture. Movement across Asia also means adaptation to many diets. On the steppe, large grazing animals may dominate the imagination, but forests offer different foods, rivers different opportunities, mountains different constraints, and tropical regions different rhythms of abundance and danger. A group moving into a new environment cannot survive by carrying only old habits. It must learn local plants, local animals, local stone, local shelter, local seasons. Some knowledge can travel. Some must be remade. The ability to adjust without agriculture, without written maps, without metal, and often without permanent structures is one of the most impressive achievements of ancient humans. Their migrations are not lines on a map. They are accumulated experiments in living. There may also have been coastal routes, though the deep past hides them especially well. Coastlines that existed during low sea level periods are often drowned today. If ancient humans used beaches, estuaries, shellfish beds, or nearshore resources, much of that evidence may now lie underwater. This is not an invitation to imagine unsupported lost civilizations beneath the waves. It is a careful archaeological problem some ordinary moai, mobile. Foraging lives may have left traces in places modern researchers cannot easily reach. The absence of coastal evidence in some regions may reflect destruction, or submergence, not absence of people. Still, scholars must work with what survives, and what survives most clearly often comes from caves, rock shelters, river deposits, and open-air sites that escaped erasure. The Altai, where Denisova Cave sits, becomes meaningful in this wider context because it lies near the meeting edges of several ecological worlds. It is a place where cold steppe, mountain valleys, forest patches, and animal routes can overlap. Such edges are often rich in resources and movement. They can bring different species, different human groups, and different traditions into contact. A cave there can preserve not only local life, but evidence of broader patterns Neanderthals moving east. Denisovans occupying the region, later humans entering Eurasian landscapes already inhabited by others. The cave is a point on a map, but the map around it is alive with motion. 1 million years ago, the ancestors behind these later patterns are already being shaped by geography. Some groups remain in familiar ranges for long periods. Some drift outward slowly as population pressure, climate, or opportunity pushes them. Some disappear when habitats collapse. Some leave descendants who will be absorbed into others. No single explanation fully accounts for the spread of ancient humans across Asia, because no single migration made it happen. It is a long, uneven process. Written in stone tools, fossil fragments, cave sediments, and genes that surface in living people long after the landscapes of origin have changed. The image that remains is not of a march, but of a slow dispersal through a continent too large to be known. A group follows a river until the valley narrows. Another crosses open grassland after herds. Another shelters under a cliff as snow falls in a mountain pass. Far to the south, others move through humid forests where bones will not last. Farther east, shorelines shift with the ice. Some will meet strangers who are almost like themselves, but not quite. Some will never know that other human worlds exist beyond the next range, and somewhere within this vast broken geography, the deep ancestry of the Denisovans spreads, divides, adapts, and waits to be discovered not in memory, but in molecules. In the vast geography of ancient Asia, movement is only the beginning. To enter a landscape is not the same as surviving it. A valley may look open from a distance and become lethal when winter descends. A plateau may offer animals and stone, yet punish every breath. A forest may promise food and hide fever, insects, and rot. A cold steppe may carry herds across its horizon, but offer little shelter when wind begins to move over frozen ground. The ancient human world is not merely a map of routes, it is a map of tests, and every test leaves pressure on the body, the group, and eventually the genome. Cold is one of the great sculptors of this age. Across the Pleistocene, climate swings in long pulses, pushing ice outward, drawing it back, lowering seas, shifting forests, turning grasslands into refuges and refuges into deserts. For humans and their relatives, cold is not only discomfort, it changes the entire economy of life. Calories become more precious, shelter matters more, fire, if controlled, becomes more valuable, clothing or hide wrapping, if used, becomes a matter of survival rather than decoration. Though direct evidence for early clothing is difficult to preserve, animals migrate differently, plants retreat or vanish for seasons, water freezes, injuries heal more slowly, infants are harder to protect. A group that survives cold does so through many small solutions layered together: where to sleep, when to move, what to eat, how to share, how to keep hands working when the air itself seems hostile. Later Neanderthals will become the famous cold-adapted humans of Ice Age Europe and Western Asia. But cold does not belong only to their story. Denisovan-related groups, too, seem to have lived across harsh northern and highland environments, at least in some places and periods. Denisova Cave itself sits in a region where winters can be severe, where the Altai landscape shifts between forest, steppe, mountain cold, and seasonal abundance. The cave does not prove that all Denisovans were cold specialists, but it does show that at least some of them occupied environments where endurance required more than ordinary tolerance. What survives in the record suggests repeated human presence through changing climates, not a single brief visit by accident. The Tibetan plateau makes the story stranger. To modern eyes, it is already one of the most demanding human environments on Earth, a high, cold, thin-aired world where survival depends on physiology as much as culture. At great altitude, the body is forced into negotiation with oxygen. Every breath brings less of it. Muscles tire more easily. Pregnancies face greater risks. Children grow under stress. Movement that would be ordinary at low elevation becomes costly. Cold and ultraviolet exposure add pressure. For a human group without modern equipment, without roads, without stored agricultural surpluses, high altitude is not a romantic wilderness. It is a severe biological challenge. And yet Denisovan-related evidence appears there. The Siahi mandible, a robust jaw from the Bashir Karst cave area on the Tibetan plateau, has been linked to Denisovan ancestry through ancient protein analysis. Later work in the region has strengthened the idea that Denisovan-related humans were present on or near the plateau long before modern highland populations. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the full extent, timing, and nature of Denisovan occupation in high-altitude Asia. But even the possibility changes the scale of the story. Denisovans are no longer only shadows in a Siberian cave. they become candidates for some of the earliest known human adaptation to one of the planet's harshest inhabited landscapes. The most famous genetic clue is a version of the EPAS1 gene region found in many Tibetans today, associated with adaptation to high altitude. It helps the body respond to low oxygen in ways that are advantageous in that environment. Genetic research indicates that this adaptive variant came from Denisovan-related ancestry. This does not mean modern Tibetans are Denisovans, nor does it mean Denisovans were the only source of high-altitude survival. Human adaptation is always complex, shaped by many genes, culture, diet, movement, and time. But it does mean that a biological solution carried by an ancient human lineage entered the ancestors of modern humans and remained useful. A vanished people helped living humans breathe on the roof of the world. That is one of the quiet wonders of this story. Extinction, or disappearance from the fossil record, does not always mean total loss. A group can vanish as a recognizable population and still leave behind a trait that matters profoundly. The people who carried that ancient variant did not know they were carrying a future inheritance. They did not know their bodies contained a solution that would outlast their own world. They simply lived, reproduced, moved, endured, and sometimes met other humans. Only much later would scientists find that a fragment of their biological legacy had travelled forward into present-day life. Adaptation, however, is never only genetic. Ancient humans survive harsh environments through behaviour as well. They learn which valleys hold shelter from wind. They discover where animals gather when snow covers the open ground. They know which stones can be worked even with cold, stiffened hands. They may use caves, overhangs, skins, branches, grass, or snow barriers depending on what is available. Though many of these materials disappear from the record, they may adjust group movement to season, following herds in warmer months and retreating to protected places when conditions worsen. In cold worlds, knowledge is insulation. Memory is a kind of shelter. Food changes under these pressures. In high and cold environments, plants may be seasonal, sparse, or difficult to process. Animal fat becomes valuable, marrow becomes important. Small animals, birds, eggs, roots, and stored knowledge of seasonal patches may matter. A carcass in winter can sustain a group, but reaching it, defending it, and processing it are dangerous tasks. If fire is available, it can transform frozen meat, warm bodies, and extend activity into darkness. If fire is unreliable, survival becomes harsher, requiring different strategies. No single explanation fully accounts for how every ancient group managed cold and altitude, because the solutions likely varied across time and place. There is also the problem of population size. Extreme environments may support fewer people. Small groups can become isolated. Isolation can encourage local adaptation, but it also increases vulnerability. A bad winter, a failed migration of animals, a disease, or the death of key knowledge holders can hit harder when numbers are low. In such worlds, contact with other groups may be rare but important. It can bring mates, information, stone, conflict, or genes. The later evidence of interbreeding among Denisovans, Neanderthals, and modern humans reminds us that survival is not only competition. Sometimes it is mixture. Sometimes the boundary between one people and another becomes a bridge through which adaptation travels. Harsh environments also reshape time. In a rich lowland season, a group may be able to recover from mistakes. In a high cold landscape, mistakes narrow quickly. The year becomes a sequence of windows, the time when passes are open, when herds move, when plants appear, when rivers can be crossed, when shelter must be reached. Ancient humans do not need calendars to understand seasonality. Their calendars are bodies, animal movements, snow lines, flowering plants, river levels, insect swarms, and the return of cold in the air. They live by patterns observed over generations, and those patterns become part of culture long before anything is written. The Denisovan connection to high altitude is especially powerful because it reveals a hidden depth behind modern adaptation. A person breathing more easily on the Tibetan plateau today may carry, in part, a legacy from people who are barely visible in fossils. This is not myth. It is not a legend of mountain spirits or lost kingdoms. It is stranger because it is biological and real, yet almost invisible. A vanished population leaves no city on the plateau, no inscription, no royal tomb, no epic poem. It leaves a molecular tool, passed through ancient encounters, preserved because the environment continues to reward it. So the story of cold, altitude, and adaptation brings the human family closer and farther away at the same time. Closer, because these ancient people faced recognizable problems: breath, warmth, hunger, children, shelter, exhaustion. Farther away, because their lives unfold in worlds without the safety nets that later humans build around themselves. They survive not by conquering nature in the modern sense, but by becoming finely attentive to it. The mountain, the cave, the steppe, and the winter do not become background. They become partners in evolution, severe and indifferent partners, shaping who lives long enough to leave descendants. Somewhere in that ancient cold, a Denisovan-related group moves through thin air or winter dusk. Their faces are still unknown. Their clothing, if they have it, is gone. Their tools remain only where stone and sediment have been kind. Their stories are lost, yet their bodies have answered the world in ways that still echo. A breath taken in a high place. A child born where oxygen is scarce. A lineage that endures because of one inherited advantage. These are not monuments, but they are legacies. And in the long age before civilization, survival itself is the monument. The breath that carries an ancient inheritance into the present is also the breath of a new science, learning how to listen to the dead. For most of archaeology's history, the deep past has been read through things that survive visibly: stone, bone, charcoal, sediment, cave walls, broken teeth, scars on animal remains. These traces still matter. They are the foundation, but they are also stubbornly limited. A stone tool does not always reveal the hand that made it. A jaw does not always explain the population behind it. A cave layer may hold many occupations, many animals, many disturbances, and no complete body at all. Then ancient DNA enters the story, and the silence changes shape. The revolution does not begin with a grand skeleton. It begins with the understanding that bones are not only shapes, they are archives. Inside them, under rare conditions, fragments of genetic material can survive long after the body itself has disappeared. Time damages DNA, water, heat, microbes, and chemistry tear it apart. Contamination from modern people can confuse the signal. Many environments destroy it completely, but in cold caves, protected sediments, teeth, and dense bone, enough can sometimes remain to reconstruct ancestry. This is not resurrection. It is not memory in a poetic sense. It is a damaged code, recovered piece by piece, compared carefully, tested against error, and made to speak in probabilities. Before DNA, extinct human groups had to be recognized mainly by anatomy. Neanderthals were known because their bones were distinctive and relatively numerous. Homo erectus was known through fossils spread across enormous time and geography. Other names came from skulls, jaws, teeth, or partial skeletons that could be measured, compared, and debated. Denisovans were different. They entered science almost backwards. A tiny finger bone from Denisova Cave did not look like the beginning of a new humanity. It looked like a fragment. Yet when its mitochondrial DNA was analysed, it revealed a lineage unlike modern humans and unlike known Neanderthals. Later, nuclear DNA confirmed that this was not merely a strange individual, but evidence of a distinct ancient population related to Neanderthals, separated from them by deep time and connected to living people through ancient interbreeding. This changed the emotional scale of a fossil fragment. A piece of bone could now stand not only for one individual, but for a hidden population spread across landscapes where fossils had not yet been found or had not survived. The child from Denisova Cave became proof that the human family tree had branches no one had recognized from bones alone. The evidence remains incomplete, and the name Denisovan still covers a reality that was probably more diverse than the word suggests. But the discovery made one thing difficult to deny: the ancient world contained human groups that had left almost no visible bodies, yet had shaped the ancestry of people alive today. Mitochondrial DNA provided the first surprise, but nuclear DNA deepened it. Mitochondrial DNA is inherited through the maternal line and can reveal important ancestry, but it is only one thread. Nuclear DNA carries a far larger record from both parents. When researchers compared Denisovan DNA with Neanderthal and modern human genomes, the relationships became clearer and more complicated. Denisovans and Neanderthals were sister groups, sharing a common ancestry after their line had separated from the ancestors of modern humans. Yet separation did not mean permanent isolation. The genomes showed contact, mixture, and inheritance across boundaries that older diagrams had often drawn too cleanly. This was one of the great blows to the old replacement story. Modern humans did not simply expand across the world as a pure, untouched lineage replacing all others without biological exchange. The truth is messier and more human. Ancestors of many people outside Africa inherited some Neanderthal DNA. Some populations in Oceania and parts of Asia inherited Denisovan-related ancestry. Other hints suggest contact with archaic groups not yet clearly identified. Human evolution became less like a royal family tree and more like a weather system, with currents meeting, dividing, and leaving traces far from where they formed. The Denisovan signal in living populations is especially striking because it points beyond the cave. If Denisovans were known only from the Altai, their story might seem local, limited to a northern refuge. But the genetic legacy in present-day populations, particularly in parts of Melanesia, Aboriginal Australian ancestry, and some Asian groups at varying levels, suggests ancient encounters somewhere far wider. The exact routes and places remain debated. Scholars still work to understand whether multiple Denisovan-related populations contributed to different modern groups, and whether those encounters happened in mainland Asia, island Southeast Asia, or several regions across time. But the basic implication is powerful. The people named from one Siberian cave were part of a much broader human world. Ancient DNA also began to reveal individuals, not just populations. One of the most astonishing finds from Denisova Cave was a bone fragment belonging to a young female whose mother was Neanderthal and whose father was Denisovan. She has often been called a first-generation hybrid, though that simple phrase can make her sound like a laboratory category, rather than a child who once lived. Her existence means that Neanderthals and Denisovans did not merely share distant ancestry. They met closely enough, and recently enough, for one person to carry one parent from each group. This does not prove such pairings were common, and no single individual can represent an entire pattern, but it proves the boundary could be crossed. That one bone fragment also changes the atmosphere of Denisova Cave. It becomes not only a shelter used by different lineages at different times, but a place within a wider region where human groups could encounter one another. Perhaps these contacts were rare. Perhaps they occurred during climate windows when ranges shifted and populations moved. Perhaps they involved small groups meeting after long separation, recognizing difference but not absolute otherness. The record cannot restore the scene. It cannot tell whether there was conflict, curiosity, fear, kinship, or simple necessity. But the genome records that contact became ancestry. Then came another quiet breakthrough, DNA from sediment. The idea seems almost unbelievable at first, that a cave floor might preserve human genetic traces even without visible human bones. Yet ancient DNA can bind to minerals and remain in sediments under favourable conditions. By sampling cave layers, researchers can detect the presence of humans and animals that occupied a site long ago. This does not solve every problem. Sediment layers can be disturbed. Genetic traces can be sparse. Dating must be careful. A DNA signal does not automatically identify who made a tool or whether a hearth belonged to one group or another. Still, sediment DNA opens a new way of seeing. It allows absence to become a kind of presence. In Denisova Cave, this matters profoundly because different human groups occupied the same general place across long periods. Neanderthal DNA appears in some layers. Denisovan DNA appears in others. The cave becomes a genetic palimpsest, a surface written over again and again by people, animals, climate, and time. The old dream of a clean archaeological layer belonging to one simple culture becomes harder to maintain. A tool tradition may not belong automatically to the group one expects. A bone fragment may sit among materials produced by others. The past is layered, mixed, and sometimes inconveniently alive. The DNA revolution also forces humility. Genetics can reveal relationships that bones cannot, but it cannot explain everything. A genome does not show a face clearly. It does not tell a story around a fire. It does not describe a language, a gesture, a fear of storms, a method for calming children, or a memory of a valley. It can suggest population size, ancestry, mixture, and adaptation, but it cannot replace archaeology, stone tools, fossils, environmental data, dating methods, and genetic evidence all have to be brought together, and they do not always align easily. The most honest picture is assembled slowly, with uncertainty kept visible. Yet even with those limits, the change is enormous. Denisovans show that a people can be discovered first as a genetic ghost and only later connected to physical remains. They show that a tiny fragment can widen the human world. They show that disappearance is not silence if molecules survive. 1,000,000 years ago, the lineages behind Denisovans, Neanderthals, and modern humans are already moving towards separation and contact. Hundreds of thousands of years later, the evidence of those movements will lie hidden in caves, teeth, sediments, and bloodlines. The ancient world does not become simpler under the microscope. It becomes more crowded. A child's finger bone becomes a continent. A tooth becomes a lineage. A handful of cave dust becomes evidence of presence. The dead do not return, but their traces disturb every clean story told about them. And somewhere between stone and genome, between the visible tool and the invisible code, the old human family begins to appear not as a ladder, not as a march, but as a gathering of shadows whose edges overlap in the dark. But shadows are not faces. The DNA from Denisova Cave can prove that a lost population existed, that it was related to Neanderthals, that it mixed with other humans, and that some of its inheritance still survives. It can reach across tens of thousands of years with a precision that once seemed impossible. Yet it cannot quite make the Denisovans stand before us. It cannot easily tell whether their eyes sat under brows like those of Neanderthals, whether their faces were broad or narrow, whether their bodies were stocky in the cold north and different elsewhere, whether their skin tones varied across Asia, or how a child from one Denisovan group might have looked beside a child from another. The science is powerful, but the portrait remains unfinished. This is one of the strangest things about Denisovans. They're not unknown because they were insignificant. They're unknown because the surviving record is so thin: a finger bone, several teeth, fragments of bone, sediment DNA, genetic traces in living people, and a jaw from the Tibetan plateau link through ancient protein analysis. These are enough to reveal a major branch of the human family, but not enough to give it a clear body. Neanderthals, by comparison, have skulls, skeletons, tools, burial debates, injuries, and whole landscapes of evidence across Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans have entered the story like figures behind frosted glass. Their presence is certain, their outline is not. The teeth are among the few hard clues. Some Denisovan-associated molars from Denisova Cave are large, unusually so compared with many later humans. Teeth can preserve ancient information with remarkable stubbornness. They resist decay, survive where delicate bones disappear, and carry details about growth, diet, ancestry, and wear. But a tooth is not a face. A large molar may suggest archaic features, powerful chewing, or deep evolutionary separation. Yet it cannot tell the full shape of the skull that held it. It cannot reveal the expression of the person who used it. It cannot show clothing, gesture, voice, or the way people move through a cave mouth at dusk. The Jiahi mandible adds another piece, and a dramatic one. A robust jaw from the Tibetan plateau, associated with Denisovan ancestry, suggests that Denisovan-related humans could live in environments far harsher and higher than once imagined. The jaw is strong, archaic, and physically impressive, but even it refuses to become a complete portrait. A lower jaw has no eyes, no forehead, no nose, no skull vault. It tells us about part of a face, part of a diet, part of a lineage, and part of a landscape. It does not settle the whole question of Denisovan appearance. Scholars still debate how much can be safely reconstructed from such limited remains, and caution matters because the temptation to fill the gaps is enormous. Some researchers have tried to infer aspects of Denisovan anatomy from patterns in ancient DNA, especially through methods that look at gene regulation and methylation, searching for clues about how bones may have developed. Such work has suggested possible traits, including features of the skull and body that may have differed from modern humans and overlapped in some ways with Neanderthals. But these reconstructions remain provisional. They are not the same as finding a skull. They are hypotheses built from molecular signals, useful and intriguing, but still dependent on assumptions, comparisons, and incomplete data. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single method fully replaces the missing skeleton. This uncertainty is not a weakness in the story. It is the story. Denisovans force science to live with a strange imbalance. They are genetically clear and physically obscure. They remind us that the fossil record does not preserve importance evenly. A population can shape human ancestry across huge regions and still leave only fragments behind. A people can have bodies, habits, children, dangers, and memories, yet enter modern knowledge through a tooth and a code. The result is both intimate and distant. Denisovans are close enough to be part of living genomes, but far enough that their faces remain mostly beyond reach. Their culture is even harder to reconstruct. At Denisova Cave, archaeologists have found stone tools, ornaments from later layers, animal bones, and traces of repeated occupation. But connecting specific artifacts to specific human groups is difficult. The cave was not used by Denisovans alone. Neanderthals were there. Other humans may have passed through the region later. Animals disturbed deposits, sediments shifted, layers accumulated across vast spans of time. A tool found in a level with Denisovan genetic traces does not automatically reveal a uniquely Denisovan culture. It may show what Denisovans made, or what others made, or a mixture of occupations close in time. Archaeology is powerful, but caves are rarely as tidy as diagrams. This is especially important when people imagine Denisovans as either brutish cave dwellers or hidden geniuses. Neither picture is justified by the evidence. There is no reason to reduce them to dull, barely thinking creatures. They were humans of an archaic kind, with ancestry, adaptation, and enough behavioral complexity to survive across demanding landscapes. But there is also no evidence for lost Denisovan cities, writing, metallurgy, or advanced civilizations in the modern sense. What survives points toward mobile or semi-mobile foraging lives, tool use, adaptation, and repeated occupation of strategic places. That may sound modest only because later civilization has trained people to confuse monumentality with importance. The deep past often leaves its most meaningful behaviors without direct traces. A group may have known how to prepare hides, but the hides vanish. They may have carried infants in slings, but fibers rot. They may have used wooden spears, digging sticks, containers, or shelters. But wood rarely survives from this depth unless conditions are exceptional. They may have had complex social rules, kinship patterns, warnings, gestures, and vocal communication. But such things do not fossilize. A cave layer can preserve a stone flake but lose the hand signal that taught a child how to strike it. It can preserve a butchered bone but lose the sharing, tension, hunger, and relief that surrounded the meal. Even language remains beyond firm reach. Denisovans almost certainly communicated in ways suited to group life, but whether they possessed language like modern humans is unknown. The same uncertainty surrounds many ancient human relatives. Anatomical hints, genetic comparisons, tool complexity, and social demands can all contribute to the debate, but none provides a simple answer. It is possible that Denisovan communication was rich in gesture, sound, expression, and learned signals. It is possible that some form of spoken language existed among archaic humans before Homo sapiens spread widely, yet the evidence cannot give us their words. Whatever they called a mountain, a child, a dead animal, a rival group, or the first snow of the season is gone. Still, behavior can be approached indirectly. To survive in the Altai, on the Tibetan plateau, and perhaps across wider parts of Asia, Denisovan-related groups must have known how to read local environments. They must have understood animal movement, stone sources, shelter, and seasonal danger. If they occupied high-altitude regions, they must have solved problems of cold, oxygen, and mobility. If they encountered different human groups, they must have navigated contact in ways that sometimes led to biological inheritance. These are not small achievements. They do not require cities to be remarkable. In the long age before civilization, the ability to remain alive across thousands of seasons is already a profound cultural accomplishment. A surprising detail lies in the way Denisovans reverse the usual order of imagination. With many ancient peoples, artists first draw the skeleton, then flesh it out, then place it in a landscape. With Denisovans, the landscape and ancestry appear before the face. There is the cave, there is the genome, there is the high plateau, there are living populations carrying fragments of their inheritance. There are giant questions where the skull should be. Their story is built from edges rather than centres, from fragments rather than monuments, from traces that point outward into a population science can detect but not yet fully see. So the Denisovan face remains a missing object in the Museum of Human Origins. It may one day emerge from a cave in Asia, dot from a jaw overlooked in a collection, from a skull fragment already found but not yet recognized, or from a site where ancient proteins survive after DNA has failed. It may prove close to expectations, or it may disturb them. Until then, the Denisovans stand in the story as a reminder that certainty and mystery can occupy the same space. They are real, but unfinished, known, but not visible, part of us, but still hidden behind the darkness of the cave. A face can remain hidden, yet an encounter can still leave evidence. That is one of the stranger lessons of the Denisovan story. The bodies are incomplete, the portraits uncertain, the tools difficult to assign, and the voices entirely gone, but somewhere in the ancient dark, people met. They came close enough to recognize one another as living beings of roughly the same kind, close enough for fear, curiosity, avoidance, conflict, and attraction to become possible. Most of those meetings vanished without a trace. A glance across a valley does not fossilize. A shouted warning, if there was one, leaves no mark in the ground. A shared shelter, a stolen carcass, a brief alliance, a fight near water, a child born from parents of different human groups. These things disappear almost completely. Almost, but not entirely. The old picture of prehistoric humanity often imagined different human species as separate actors on a wide stage, each entering, flourishing, and exiting in turn. Homo erectus here, Neanderthals there, modern humans later, Denisovans as a newly discovered branch in the background. But life rarely respects the clean borders of diagrams. Ancient populations moved through changing landscapes, following animals, water, seasons, and chance. Their ranges expanded and contracted with climate. A cold step might open a passage between regions that had been separate. A warmer forest might isolate groups that once moved freely. A drought could force people toward the same river. A glacial pulse could push populations south or into refugees. When the land rearranged itself, human worlds touched. The deepest encounters are mostly beyond reach, especially 1 million years ago, when the lineages leading toward later Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans are still unfolding. There is no clear record of a meeting between a named Denisovan and a named ancestor at that date. The evidence simply does not allow such precision, but the broader pattern of human evolution suggests that separation and contact are recurring forces. Populations divide long enough to become genetically and anatomically distinct, then meet again when geography or climate permits. The later genomes show this clearly, and those later signals cast light backward, suggesting that the roots of contact were part of the human condition long before civilization. In Denisova Cave, this pattern becomes almost shockingly personal. One small bone fragment belongs to a young individual whose mother was Neanderthal and whose father was Denisovan. She is not a theory of contact. she is contact recorded in a body. Her existence proves that these two groups, separated by deep evolutionary time, could meet closely enough to produce a child. It does not tell us how common such events were. It does not tell us whether her parents belonged to groups that lived near one another for generations, or whether one group had moved into the range of another during a climatic shift. It does not tell us whether the union was accepted, forced, ordinary, rare, peaceful, or surrounded by tension. The evidence remains incomplete, but it tells us that the boundary was crossed. That child also reminds us that terms like Neanderthal and Denisovan are scientific categories, not the categories people would have used for themselves. To the living beings involved, difference may have been visible in face, body, smell, voice, behavior, or tool traditions. Or it may have been subtle in some cases, more like encountering unfamiliar neighbours than a different species in the dramatic sense. Ancient human groups likely varied among themselves, and not every Denisovan-related population would have looked or behaved exactly like every other one. The same is true for Neanderthals and later modern humans. A stranger in the Pleistocene might be deeply foreign or only slightly different, depending on where, when, and how populations met. Encounters need not have been gentle. The deep past contains violence, injuries, competition over carcasses, access to shelter, mating, territory, water, and raw material could all create conflict. Small groups living under pressure may have treated outsiders as threats. A valley with reliable water in a dry period could become worth defending. A cave shelter in winter might not welcome newcomers. The archaeological record rarely captures such moments directly, and it would be reckless to turn every meeting into a battle. Still, human history and primate behavior both warn that contact can include aggression. Cooperation and hostility are not opposites in the deep past. They may exist side by side. Nor should every encounter be imagined as violence. Genes move through reproduction, and reproduction requires more than distant awareness. Sometimes groups must have come close enough for individuals to leave one community and enter another, or for brief unions to occur along the edges of group contact. There may have been exchanges of food, mates, information, stone, or shelter. There may have been children who grew up carrying more than one ancestry without anyone thinking of them as hybrids. The word hybrid belongs to science. The child belongs to life. In a small Pleistocene group, a child's survival would depend less on taxonomy than on whether adults fed, protected, and tolerated that child through the dangerous years of dependence. The genetic record shows that Denisovans also encountered ancestors of modern humans. These meetings happened much later than 1 million years ago, after Homo sapiens emerged in Africa and some populations expanded into Eurasia, but they belong to the same long story of overlapping humanities. Modern human groups moving through Asia did not enter an empty continent. They entered landscapes already inhabited by other human lineages, some visible in fossils, others barely known. Somewhere in those movements, ancestors of some present-day populations acquired Denisovan ancestry. The exact locations and timings remain debated, and scholars still work to determine whether there were multiple Denisovan-related source populations rather than one single group. But the genetic traces show that contact occurred more than once in the broad story of ancient humans. These encounters may have been shaped by numbers. Modern humans expanding into new regions may have arrived in small groups. Denisovan-related populations may also have been scattered, locally adapted, and unevenly distributed. When small populations meet, even a few unions can leave lasting genetic signals if descendants survive and expand. A genetic legacy does not require massive blending between huge populations. It can begin with limited contact, then become amplified through later population growth, migration, and selection. This is especially important in the case of adaptive traits, such as the high-altitude-associated Denisovan variant in Tibetan populations. A single inherited advantage can persist not because the original population remains visible, but because the environment keeps rewarding the trait. Yet genes reveal only the biological aftermath, not the lived experience. When two ancient groups met, each carried a world of knowledge. One might know a mountain route better, another might know where herds crossed a valley in late season. One might use stone differently or prefer certain shelters. One might have ways of processing hides, carrying infants, maintaining fire, or reading weather that another lacked. Some knowledge may have crossed boundaries along with people. Some may have been ignored or lost. Some encounters may have changed behavior without leaving a clear genetic mark. Archaeology has difficulty tracing this because tools can spread without genes, and genes can spread without obvious tools. This is why assigning culture to a species becomes so difficult in places like Denisova Cave. If Neanderthals and Denisovans both used the cave at different times, and perhaps encountered one another in the region, then a layer of tools is not automatically a signature of one group's mind. A technique could be learned, copied, independently invented, or left by a different population than expected. Even ornaments or symbolic objects from later layers must be handled carefully, because the presence of multiple human groups makes simple labels risky. No single explanation fully accounts for the relationship between bodies, genes, and artifacts at such complicated sites. The encounters also complicate the idea of disappearance. If a population mixes into another, where exactly does it end? A group may vanish as a distinct community while some of its ancestry continues. Its language, stories, and local knowledge may disappear, while parts of its genome survive. Its face may vanish from the fossil record, while its adaptation remains in living bodies. The Denisovan story lives inside that paradox. They are gone enough to be mysterious, but not gone enough to be irrelevant. In the ancient dark, the meetings themselves are lost. No one can follow the footprints far enough to see the first moment of recognition. No one can hear what sounds passed between groups at the edge of a river or beneath the mouth of a cave. But the bodies remembered what the stories did not. DNA carried the evidence forward, quietly, generation after generation, long after the people who first met had vanished into sediment. The human past is not a sequence of isolated species replacing one another like shadows on a wall. It is a history of contact cautious, dangerous, intimate, and unfinished. Long after the meetings in the ancient dark, the cave keeps what people cannot. It keeps dust, ash, broken stone, splinters of bone, animal teeth, pollen, charcoal, minerals, and microscopic traces of bodies that no longer exist. Denisova Cave is not a shrine built for memory. It is a natural trap for time. People enter it, leave it, return to it, abandon it, and are replaced by others. Animals drag bones into it. Bears sleep there. Hyenas may disturb older deposits. Rodents tunnel. Water seeps. Cold settles. Sediment falls grain by grain. What looks like earth underfoot becomes an archive, but not a clean one. It is crowded, damaged, compressed, and sometimes misleading. To read it, scientists must work almost against the instincts of imagination. Because the cave does not preserve a story in order, it preserves fragments of events that may be separated by centuries, millennia, or tens of thousands of years. A cave floor can seem still, but it is never truly still. Sediments accumulate through wind, water, roof fall, animal activity, human occupation, and slow chemical change. A layer may hold the remains of a cold period, then a warmer phase, then another return of cold. Within those layers, tools and bones may settle, shift, break, or be moved by animals. A small object can travel downward through cracks. A burrow can mix younger and older material. A hearth can be disturbed long after its fire has gone out. This is why the archaeology of deep time requires patience that feels almost unnatural. Every object has to be considered not only for what it is, but for how it arrived where it was found. At Denisova Cave, the challenge is especially great because the site was used repeatedly by different beings. Neanderthals appear in the genetic record. Denisovans appear in the genetic record. Later, modern humans may have moved through the broader region, and animals use the cave throughout its long history. A stone tool found in a layer cannot simply be lifted into the light and assigned to a people with confidence. The cave has too many visitors and too much time. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how to connect specific artifacts to specific occupants, especially when DNA, stone tools, and dating do not always align as neatly as anyone would like. Yet the evidence is powerful precisely because it is so layered. Denisova Cave contains traces of human presence across a vast period, allowing researchers to see not one occupation, but a rhythm of return. Groups come during certain climatic windows and disappear during others. The cave is used in a region where forests, steppe, and mountain environments change around it. This means the people who enter it are not living in a stable backdrop. They are responding to shifting worlds. When the climate becomes colder and drier, the animals change. When the landscape becomes more wooded, resources shift again. The cave watches as the valley changes costume many times, and each layer holds a faint memory of those changes. The stone tools from such places are often modest compared with the drama people expect from lost human lineages. There may be flakes, cores, scrapers, points, and larger tools depending on the layer and period. Some show careful working, some are practical debris from tool-making. Some may have been brought in from nearby sources, while others reflect stone chosen farther away. A flake is a small thing, but under analysis it can show how a person struck the core, what angle they used, whether the edge was retouched, whether it was used on meat, hide, wood, or plant material. Even when the maker is unknown, the tool preserves a gesture. It is the fossil of a movement. Animal bones add another layer of life. Some bones are broken by carnivores, some carry cut marks from stone tools, some are burned, some reveal which animals lived in the region during different climatic phases. A cave deposit can contain evidence of horses, deer, bison-like animals, hyenas, bears, birds, rodents, and other creatures, each one helping reconstruct the environment around the human occupants. Sometimes humans and carnivores may have used the cave at different times, each inheriting the space from the other without knowing it. A predator den and a human shelter can occupy the same hollow across different seasons or centuries. The cave is not human property. It is a contested and recurring refuge. Sediment DNA deepens the story in a way earlier generations of archaeologists could hardly have imagined. From the soil itself, researchers can sometimes detect genetic traces of humans and animals, even when no visible bone remains. This means a layer may reveal the presence of Denisovans or Neanderthals without offering a tooth, jaw, or skull. The cave floor becomes an invisible graveyard of contact skin cells, bodily fluids, decayed fragments. and biological traces bound to minerals and sealed by time. This is one of the most surprising details in the study of Denisovans. A vanished human group can be found not only in a fossil, but in the dirt around where it once breathed. Still, sediment DNA must be handled carefully. A genetic trace does not automatically explain what someone was doing there. It does not prove who made a nearby tool. It does not reveal how many people entered the cave, whether they stayed for days or returned season after season, whether they slept inside, butchered animals near the entrance, sheltered from storms, or simply passed through. The signal can show presence, but presence is not the same as a full life. This is the difference between evidence and imagination. The evidence opens a door. The imagination must not run too far beyond it. Other possible Denisovan-linked sites widen the picture, though each comes with caution. The Tibetan Plateau evidence, especially the robust jaw from the Baishia Karst cave area and later finds in that region, suggests Denisovan-related humans could occupy high-altitude environments. There are also fossils from China and other parts of Asia that have been discussed in relation to Denisovans or broader archaic populations, but many remain uncertain because DNA has not survived or because the anatomy does not give a simple answer. Asia's fossil record contains several puzzling human remains that may one day clarify Denisovan diversity, or may belong to related but distinct groups. For now, no single explanation fully accounts for the scattered evidence. This uncertainty makes the archaeological record feel less like a solved puzzle and more like a field of partly buried signals. A tooth in Siberia, a jaw in Tibet, genetic ancestry in living populations far to the south and east, cave sediments that speak without bones, stone tools that may have passed through several kinds of hands. The picture is not empty, but it is broken, and the breaks matter. They remind us that a people can occupy a large world and still be known from very little. They remind us that preservation is not fairness. The ground does not save the most important lives. It saves what conditions allow. Inside Denisova Cave, a researcher brushing sediment from a layer is not simply uncovering objects. They are entering a conversation between climate, geology, animal behavior, human movement, and chance. Each grain has passed through transformations no ancient person intended. A child may have dropped a bone fragment near the cave wall. A carnivore may have dragged in prey. Ash may have blown from a fire. Rainwater may have carried fine particles inward. A later animal may have disturbed the deposit. Cold may have protected DNA that warmth elsewhere destroyed. Then modern science arrives and asks the cave to separate all of this into meaning. What survives suggests that Denisovans and their neighbours were not phantoms drifting through empty landscapes. They returned to useful places. They made and used tools. They lived among animals in changing climates. They occupied caves, valleys, plateaus, and perhaps many environments where the evidence has vanished. The silence around them is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of poor preservation, scattered excavation, and lives lived mostly in materials that decay. Their archaeology is quiet, but it is not mute. It speaks in fragments, and each fragment says the same difficult thing: there was more here than the record can yet show. The record can prove that Denisovans existed, that they met other humans, that their ancestry survived, and that they occupied more than one kind of harsh world. But then the trail begins to thin. The cave layers continue. The climates change. Modern humans spread farther across Eurasia. Neanderthals fade from their western strongholds. Other archaic populations disappear into fragments, arguments, and genetic shadows. and the Denisovans, who were never very visible to begin with, seem to vanish almost before they have fully stepped into view. Disappearance is a difficult word in prehistory. It sounds sudden, like a door closing. It suggests a final scene, the last campfire going cold, the last group crossing a ridge, the last child of a people dying without descendants. But deep time rarely gives scenes that clear. More often, disappearance is a loss of resolution. Fossils become scarce, genetic signals change, tool traditions shift, populations shrink, mix, move, or are absorbed. A people may stop existing as a distinct group long before all of their ancestry is gone, or they may continue somewhere beyond the reach of current evidence. The record does not always show extinction. Sometimes it only shows that science has lost the trail. For Denisovans, this problem is especially sharp because the trail was thin from the beginning. There is no broad chain of Denisovan skeletons marching across Asia through time. There is no sequence of skulls showing gradual decline. There is no final Denisovan village, no battlefield, no cemetery, no layer marked clearly by the end of a people. There are fragments, genomes, sediments, a jaw, teeth, and surviving ancestry in living populations. From these, researchers infer a once wider presence. But when and where Denisovan groups cease to exist as separate communities remains uncertain. Scholars still debate not only why they disappeared, but what exactly disappearance means in their case. Climate is the first suspect, because climate governs so much of the Pleistocene world. Ice ages are not simply colder versions of the present, they reorganize entire ecosystems. Forests retreat, grasslands spread or collapse, deserts expand, rivers shift, animal ranges move, sea levels fall, exposing land bridges, then rise again, drowning lowland routes and coastal sites. A human group adapted to one pattern of resources may find that pattern broken within a few generations. The animals it follows move away. The plants it knows become rare. The old map inside the group's memory no longer matches the world. Denisovan-related populations may have lived across regions where climate pressure was severe and uneven. In the Altai, cold and ecological change would have shaped occupation again and again. On the Tibetan plateau, altitude and cold created chronic stress even in better times. In other parts of Asia, tropical forests, monsoon shifts, sea level changes, and island barriers may have produced very different pressures, because the name Denisovan likely covers more than one local population. No single climate event can explain everything. A cold pulse that harms one group might open steppe corridors for another. A wetter interval that helps one region might isolate another behind forest or flood. No single explanation fully accounts for their disappearance across such a broad possible range. Population size may have mattered just as much. Small populations are vulnerable in ways large ones are not. If Denisovan groups were scattered across difficult environments, local extinction could happen quietly. A harsh winter, a failed hunting season, disease, conflict, or the loss of key adults could damage a small group beyond recovery. In small communities, chance becomes powerful. A few deaths at the wrong time can break knowledge transmission. A shortage of unrelated mates can deepen isolation. A lineage can fade not through dramatic catastrophe, but through ordinary pressures repeated too often. This is one of the hardest truths about prehistory. Most disappearances do not require a single apocalyptic moment. They can happen through attrition. A group retreats from one valley and never returns. Another merges with neighbours after several difficult generations. A third loses numbers until its children are raised among a different people. A fourth survives in a remote region for a while longer. leaving no fossils that have yet been found from a distance. All of these different endings may look like one disappearance, the ground record's absence, but not always the process that created it. Modern humans add another pressure, but not in the simple form once imagined. It is tempting to tell the story as a conquest Homo sapiens arrives, and every other human vanishes. That version is dramatic but too blunt. Modern humans did expand widely and eventually became the only surviving human species. They may have competed with Denisovan-related populations for resources in some regions. They may have brought new tools, broader social networks, symbolic systems, flexible technologies, or demographic advantages. Yet the evidence does not support one universal scene of violent replacement. Contact included interbreeding, and interbreeding means the boundary between replacement and absorption is blurred. Absorption may be the most haunting possibility. A Denisovan group can disappear as a Denisovan group because its descendants become part of expanding modern human populations. In such a case, there is no last Denisovan in a clean biological sense. There are children with mixed ancestry, then grandchildren with more mixed ancestry, then descendants who belong culturally and socially to another population while still carrying pieces of the older lineage. Over time, the visible group is gone. But the genome remembers. This kind of ending leaves no smoking ruin. It leaves inheritance. Disease is another possible factor, though harder to prove. When populations separated for long periods meet again, pathogens can move with devastating effects. Small groups with limited immunity may suffer severely, but ancient disease rarely leaves clear traces at this depth, especially for Denisovans. It remains a plausible pressure rather than a demonstrated cause. The same is true for conflict. Violence may have occurred, but archaeology cannot yet show a Denisovan extinction driven by warfare or systematic killing. Popular stories often prefer dramatic causes, but the evidence asks for restraint. Technology may have played a role, but here too caution is needed. Modern humans later show remarkable cultural flexibility, long-distance networks, ornaments, specialized tools, and symbolic behaviors in many regions. Such advantages may have helped them survive instability and expand into new landscapes. But it would be wrong to assume Denisovans lacked intelligence simply because their surviving record is sparse. Poor preservation can erase wood, fiber, hides, and many forms of behavior. A lack of monuments is not a lack of mind. The disappearance of Denisovans may also be partly an illusion created by naming. If Denisovan-related populations were diverse across Asia, some might have persisted longer than others. Some fossils currently assigned to vague archaic categories may one day prove connected to them. Some genetic traces may point to deeply divergent Denisovan-like populations that have not yet been matched to bones. The end of the Denisovans, as currently understood, may shift as new finds appear. A jaw from one cave, a protein sequence from one tooth, or DNA from sediment in an unexpected region could redraw the boundary between presence and absence. So the problem remains open. Denisovans vanish from view because climate changes, populations move, modern humans expand, contacts occur, groups mix, and the record fails. None of these explanations alone is enough. Together, they form a more realistic ending, not a single extinction event, but a long fading through fragmentation and absorption. The people themselves do not know they're disappearing. No group lives under the name Denisovan. They live through seasons, follow animals, raise children, endure losses, meet strangers, and make choices under pressure. Only much later does science look back and see that the outline has dissolved. In the cave, the layers continue to settle. In the mountains, snow covers old paths. On the plateau, wind crosses stone where footsteps are gone. Farther south and east, descendants of mixed populations move into new worlds, carrying fragments of ancestry they cannot see. The Denisovans disappear, but not like smoke vanishing into empty air. They disappear like a river entering gravel, no longer visible on the surface, still moving somewhere underneath. A river entering gravel does not end in one place, and that may be the best way to understand the Denisovan disappearance. The older habit is to search for a single cause, a clean explanation sharp enough to hold in one sentence. Climate killed them. Modern humans replaced them. They were absorbed. They were too few. They could not compete. Disease weakened them. Their world changed faster than they could follow. Each possibility has weight, but each one becomes too simple when forced to stand alone. The Denisovans were not one camp, one valley, or one final generation. They were likely a set of related populations spread unevenly across immense and varied landscapes, and a wide people rarely vanish for only one reason. Climate remains the broadest pressure because it changes everything without needing intention. In the Pleistocene, climate does not merely make winters colder or summers warmer, it rearranges the rules of life. A valley that once held grazing animals may become forested. A forest may open into dry steppe, a lake may shrink into salt flats, a pass may close under ice. A coastline may move far beyond the horizon as sea levels fall, then drown again when ice melts, for mobile foragers. These shifts can create opportunity, but they can also break old knowledge. The memory of where animals move, where plants return, where stone is found, and where shelter remains dry may fail when the landscape itself changes character. For Denisovan-related groups, climate pressure would not have been uniform. A northern population in the Altai faces different dangers from a high-altitude group near the Tibetan plateau, and both differ from any Denisovan-related people who may have lived farther south or east. This is why no single glacial event can explain them all. Some regions may have become harder, others may have opened temporarily, some groups may have expanded during cold steppe phases, while others became isolated when forests, deserts, or mountains cut roots apart. The evidence remains incomplete, but the scale of their possible range makes a single climate catastrophe unlikely as a complete answer. Isolation may have worked more quietly. Small groups can survive for a long time in difficult places, but they live near the edge of demographic danger. A group needs enough children, enough adults, enough unrelated mates, enough knowledge holders, and enough contact with neighbouring groups to recover from losses. When populations become too small or too scattered, ordinary misfortune becomes severe. One failed season can reduce numbers. One epidemic can remove elders who know distant water sources or animal movements. One conflict can make a valley unusable. One blocked pass can prevent exchange with related groups for generations. No dramatic extinction scene is required. A population can thin until it is no longer able to maintain itself as a separate community. Competition with modern humans is another possibility, but it has to be handled carefully. Homo sapiens eventually becomes the only surviving human species, and modern human groups do show extraordinary flexibility in many later contexts. They build wider social networks, create varied toolkits, use symbols extensively, and occupy environments from deserts to rainforests to Arctic edges. Those advantages may have mattered when modern humans entered regions already occupied by other human lineages. A group with broader exchange networks may survive a shortage better. A group with more flexible technology may exploit new foods more easily. A group with larger population connections may recover faster after local disaster. Yet this does not mean Denisovans were simply inferior. Their survival across harsh Asian environments suggests competence, endurance, and adaptation. Competition may have been real, but it was probably not a simple contest between clever newcomers and helpless archaic people. Absorption offers a different kind of ending. In this explanation, Denisovans do not disappear only because they die out. They disappear because their descendants become part of other populations. When modern humans encounter Denisovan-related groups, some interbreeding occurs. Children are born with mixed ancestry. If those children and their descendants live within expanding modern human communities, the Denisovan group can fade socially and culturally while pieces of its genome continue forward. Over many generations, the visible boundary dissolves. The language, local habits, and identity of the smaller population may vanish, but inherited variants remain. This is not extinction in the clean sense. It is a merger under unequal conditions, and it may have happened repeatedly in different places. Disease may have added pressure, though it is difficult to prove. Populations separated for long periods can carry different pathogens or different immune histories. Contact can expose small groups to infections they are poorly prepared to survive. The problem is that disease rarely leaves clear fingerprints in the Denisovan record. Ancient DNA can sometimes reveal pathogens in well-preserved remains, but Denisovan fossils are too few to support a broad disease explanation. It remains plausible, especially as part of a larger pattern of stress, but not demonstrated. The same is true of violence. Conflict almost certainly existed in the Pleistocene, but there is no evidence for a single violent campaign that erased Denisovans across Asia. Popular stories may prefer battles. The ground is less theatrical. Technology and culture are harder still. Modern humans later leave abundant evidence of symbolic behavior, personal ornaments, long-distance exchange, specialized tools, and rapid cultural change. These patterns may have helped them adapt and expand, but the absence of equally rich Denisovan material evidence cannot automatically be read as lack. The Denisovan record is small, and many materials that may have mattered most — wood, hide, fiber, plant containers, temporary shelters — are usually gone. It is possible that Denisovan-related groups had local traditions of considerable complexity that have simply not survived. It is also possible that modern humans possess social or cultural advantages that mattered over long periods. Both can be true at once. Another possibility is that the word Denisovan hides several endings under one name. Genetic studies suggest that the Denisovan ancestry in living people may not come from one uniform population. There may have been deeply divergent Denisovan-related groups, separated from one another for long spans of time. If so, the disappearance of Denisovans was not one event, but many. One northern group may have vanished through isolation. A highland group may have mixed into incoming populations. A southern group may have persisted longer in regions where fossils have not survived. Another may be represented by remains already found but not yet identified. Scholars still debate the number, range, and relationships of these populations, and future discoveries may divide the Denisovan label into a more complicated set of histories. The most realistic explanation is therefore cumulative. Climate destabilizes habitats. Small populations become vulnerable. Modern humans expand into some of the same landscapes. Contact brings mixture, competition, perhaps disease, perhaps conflict, and perhaps exchange. Some Denisovan-related groups shrink. Some are absorbed. Some lose continuity as separate communities. Some may survive longer in places still archaeologically quiet. Over time, the name disappears from the visible record. But the ancestry does not vanish completely. A people becomes a trace. This kind of ending feels unsatisfying only because later history teaches people to expect dramatic ruins. Civilizations leave burned palaces, abandoned temples, collapsed walls, and inscriptions that speak of kings and disasters. Denisovans leave something stranger, a disappearance without monuments, a survival without identity, a people known by fragments and inherited breath. Their end is not a single final night at the mouth of a cave. It is a long dimming across landscapes too large to excavate fully, under climates too restless to forgive weakness, among human groups close enough to compete, close enough to mix, and close enough to carry one another into the future. The Denisovans disappear from the visible record, but not from the human story. Their bones remain rare, their faces uncertain, their tools difficult to assign, their last communities lost somewhere in the broken geography of Pleistocene Asia. Yet pieces of them move forward, hidden inside living bodies. This is the strange afterlife of a vanished people, not a tomb, not a monument, not a legend remembered by descendants, but inheritance carried quietly in cells. A person can stand under the modern sun, far from Denisova Cave, far from the Altai cold, far from the ancient valleys where these encounters took place, and still carry small fragments of ancestry from a human lineage that science only recently learned to name. This does not mean living people are Denisovans in any simple sense. It means that some ancestors of present-day populations met Denisovan-related groups in the deep past, had children with them, and passed pieces of that ancestry onward. Over generations, most inherited segments were broken apart, diluted, lost, or reshuffled. Some remained by chance. Some may have remained because they were useful. The result is uneven, patterned, and deeply informative. Denisovan ancestry is not spread equally across the world. It appears at higher levels in some populations of Oceania, including Papuan and some Aboriginal Australian ancestry, and at lower or more specialized levels in parts of Asia. The details remain debated, especially because the Denisovan populations that contributed to living people may not have been identical to the group represented by the tiny finger bone from Denisova Cave. That last point matters. The name Denisovan can make the story sound as if one small northern population somehow reached everywhere, but genetics suggests a more complicated picture. Some Denisovan-related ancestry in living populations appears deeply divergent, as if it came from groups related to Denisova Cave Denisovans, but separated from them for a long time. This implies that Denisovan diversity may have been broad across Asia. There may have been northern Denisovans, southern Denisovan-related populations, highland groups, and others still unknown. What survives in living genomes may be less like a single signature and more like faint signals from several related branches of a wider archaic humanity. In Oceania, the Denisovan legacy is especially strong by comparison with most other regions. Ancestors of some present-day Melanesian and Papuan populations carry notable Denisovan-related ancestry, suggesting ancient interbreeding before or during the deep history of human movement towards Sahul, the Ice Age landmass that joined Australia and New Guinea. The exact place of contact remains uncertain. It may have occurred somewhere in Southeast Asia, island Southeast Asia, or across a wider zone where modern humans encountered Denisovan-related populations before reaching the far southern lands. Many of the landscapes where this could have happened have changed dramatically since then. Lower sea levels exposed land that is now underwater. Tropical environments often destroy ancient DNA. Fossils are scarce. The genetic signal, therefore, reaches into regions where the ground has preserved little. This is one of the most powerful contradictions in the story. The people of Oceania have among the clearest Denisovan genetic inheritance, yet the best-known Denisovan fossils come from Siberia and the Tibetan Plateau. The bones are in the northern highlands. The strongest living signals point far to the south and east. This mismatch does not mean the genetic evidence is wrong. It means the fossil record is incomplete. It means that Denisovan-related people likely lived in places where their bodies have not been found, have not survived, or have not yet been recognized. The map of Denisovan life is still being drawn from the edges inward. In parts of mainland and East Asia, Denisovan-related ancestry appears in smaller amounts, but it still matters. Some segments may reflect different introgression events from different Denisovan-related populations. In other words, there may not have been one meeting between modern humans and Denisovans, but several, separated by geography and time. A group moving through one part of Asia may have encountered one archaic population. Another group, moving along a different route or in a later period, may have encountered another. Their descendants carried different fragments into the present. This makes living genomes a kind of map, but not an easy one. The map has been folded, torn, copied, and overwritten by later migrations. The high-altitude story gives one of the clearest examples of a Denisovan inheritance that seems to have been useful. Many Tibetan people carry a variant in the EPAS-1 region associated with adaptation to life in low-oxygen environments, and research indicates that this variant came from Denisovan-related ancestry. It helps explain how some human populations thrive at elevations where oxygen is scarce and ordinary physiology struggles. The ancient people who first carried that variant did not know they were leaving a gift. They were not planning for future Tibetans. They were simply surviving in harsh landscapes, and one part of their biological inheritance proved valuable long after their own communities disappeared. Other inherited segments may have affected immunity, metabolism, or responses to local environments, though these connections are often more complex and uncertain. Not every archaic segment is beneficial. Some may be neutral. Some may have been harmful and removed by natural selection over time. Some may have been useful in one environment and less useful in another. The genome is not a museum of treasures. It is a record of inheritance filtered by survival, reproduction, chance, and changing conditions. Scholars still debate the function of many Denisovan-derived segments, and caution is necessary because a genetic association does not always reveal a simple cause. Still, the broader meaning is clear. Modern humanity is not a pure line descending untouched from a single ancestral population. It is a braided inheritance. Many living people carry Neanderthal ancestry. Some carry Denisovan-related ancestry. There may be traces of other archaic populations not yet fully identified. This does not divide modern people into separate ancient categories. It does the opposite. It shows that human history has always involved movement and mixture, and that the boundaries between groups have often been more porous than later myths of purity allow. The deep past is not clean. It is connected. The Denisovan legacy also changes how disappearance feels. If a people vanishes completely, the loss is absolute. But Denisovans did not vanish in that absolute way. Their communities disappeared. Their languages, if they had them, are gone. Their tools cannot always be separated from those of others. Their faces remain mostly unknown. Yet parts of their biological story remain active in the present. A child born today in a highland environment may benefit from an adaptation rooted in archaic contact. A genome sampled in a modern laboratory may reveal ancestry from people who left almost no graves. The dead are not alive, but neither are they entirely absent. There is humility in this. A tiny bone in a Siberian cave reveals a lost population. A living genome in Oceania points to a wider range. A gene variant in Tibet remembers high-altitude survival. Each clue is powerful, but each is partial. The evidence remains incomplete, and the story will almost certainly change as new fossils, new sediments, new proteins, and new genomes are studied. The Denisovans are not a finished chapter. They are a moving edge of knowledge. So the ghost in the genome is not a ghost in the supernatural sense. It is more unsettling because it is real. It means that the past has entered the present without memory, without name, without story. It means that vanished people can remain inside humanity long after their camps are gone. Somewhere behind the ordinary act of breathing, walking, surviving illness, bearing children, and adapting to place. There may be traces from encounters in the ancient dark. The Denisovans left no empire, but they left inheritance, and in the long measure of human time, inheritance can outlast stone. The Denisovan ghost in living genomes brings the story back to the older world where it began, 1 million years ago, before the names Denisovan, Neanderthal, Homo sapiens, or civilization could mean anything to the beings moving across the land. That ancient world is not a failed version of the present. It is not a waiting room for cities. It is the main body of the human past, the long age in which survival is measured not by monuments, but by endurance through cold, hunger, distance, injury, childbirth, and change. Civilization will arrive very late, like a thin layer of bright paint over a vast stone. Beneath it lies the deeper story, hundreds of thousands of years of human relatives learning how to remain alive without fields, writing, metal, states, or permanent shelter. The temptation is always to place modern humanity at the center and arrange everything else around it. Homo erectus becomes a step toward us. Neanderthals become almost us. Denisovans become a mystery branch. Earlier populations become shadows leading to the familiar face in the mirror. But the past does not exist for the comfort of the present. Each human lineage lived inside its own world, with no knowledge that later scientists would name it, compare it, or measure its success by whether it contributed to modern people. Homo erectus did not survive for such an astonishing span because it was waiting to be surpassed. Neanderthal ancestors did not endure Ice Age Europe as a footnote. Denisovan-related groups did not move across Asia merely to leave useful genes behind. They lived because living was the task before them. 1 million years ago, that task is already vast. Ancient humans and their relatives occupied different regions across Africa and Eurasia. Some populations move through open grasslands. Some use forests and river systems. Some survive in colder zones. Some cross into landscapes where the evidence has been destroyed or still lies undiscovered. They use stone technologies that endure longer than any empire. They return to places where water, shelter, animals, and good stone make life possible. They face predators not as symbols, but as real competitors. They raise children whose survival depends on attention and care. They learn by watching, repeating, correcting, remembering. Their world has no written archive, yet knowledge moves through bodies for generations. The evidence for that world is still painfully partial. A skull can be missing its face, a jaw can have no name, a stone tool can outlive the hand but not reveal the mind completely. DNA can expose ancestry while leaving culture obscure. Sediment can show presence while hiding the story of what happened there. Scholars still debate the classification of many fossils, the timing of fire control, the meaning of tool variation, the number of Denisovan-related populations, and the exact routes by which archaic ancestry entered living people. This uncertainty is not a failure of science. It is the nature of deep time. The record is not a library. It is a storm-damaged landscape of clues. And yet, from those clues, a powerful pattern emerges. Humanity is not a straight line. It is not a ladder rising neatly from primitive to advanced. It is a braided history of populations spreading, separating, adapting, meeting, mixing, and fading. Some branches leave descendants, some leave only fossils, some leave only tools, some leave only questions. Some, like the Denisovans, leave almost no visible body and still change the understanding of human origins. The discovery of Denisovan DNA reveals that the ancient human world was more crowded than once imagined, and more intimate. Different human groups were not always sealed away from one another. They met. Sometimes they had children. Sometimes pieces of one lineage became part of another. This does not make the deep past gentle. It does not turn ancient encounters into a simple story of harmony. Competition, fear, violence, disease, and displacement may all have shaped human history long before civilization. But neither is the past only brutality. The same record that shows danger also implies care, learning, cooperation, and continuity. A long childhood requires protection. A tool tradition requires teaching. A healed injury can imply support. A group surviving in winter requires shared attention. Ancient humans are not modern people in animal skins, but they are not empty creatures either. They are social, adaptable, vulnerable, and persistent. Civilization, seen from this depth, begins to look less like the beginning of humanity and more like one recent solution among many. Farming changes everything, but people survive for immense spans before farming. Cities transform human life, but they are not proof that earlier life lacked complexity. Writing preserves memory, but memory exists long before writing. Temples and tombs impress the eye, but the quiet survival of small groups through hundreds of thousands of seasons is a deeper kind of achievement. The people 1 million years ago build no pyramids because their world does not work that way. Their achievement is not stone raised into the sky. It is children reaching adulthood in a world that gives no guarantees. The Denisovans sharpen that lesson because they force attention toward what is missing. Their faces remain largely unknown. Their range is only partly mapped. Their cultures are difficult to identify. Their disappearance has no final scene. Yet they matter because they reveal how much of the human story can exist outside visibility. A tiny finger bone, a tooth, a jaw, a cave floor, a genetic variant in highland people, and ancestry in distant populations become enough to redraw the ancient map. They show that the most important traces are not always the largest. Sometimes the smallest fragment opens the widest door. The world 1 million years ago is therefore not a blank before the real story. It is the deep foundation of the real story. It is the age when human bodies are tested across continents, when minds sharpen themselves against necessity, when populations begin paths that will later lead to Neanderthals, Denisovans, modern humans, and others still poorly understood. It is the age before civilization, but not before intelligence, not before tradition, not before courage, not before loss. The absence of writing does not mean the absence of experience. The absence of cities does not mean the absence of worlds. If there is a final lesson in this long past, it may be humility. Modern humans inherit the planet now, but not because the path was always clear. The survival of our species is built on older experiments, older movements, older mixtures, and older disappearances. Some of those lost people remain in bones, some remain in tools, some remain in the air of mountain plateaus, where an ancient inheritance still helps living bodies meet thin oxygen. Some remain only as possibilities waiting in unexcavated caves. The human story is larger than memory, older than civilization, and stranger than the simple idea of progress can hold. The sun sets again over the imagined world before history. A group moves towards shelter. Smoke may rise, or there may be only darkness. Beyond them, animals cross the plain. In distant mountains, unknown relatives endure cold and altitude. In forests where bones will not last, other humans move through green shadows. They do not know they are ancient. They do not know they are part of a mystery. They know the weight of tools, the taste of hunger, the danger in the wind, and the warmth of bodies close together. Long before civilization, humanity is already becoming many things at once, and most of those things will never be fully recovered. Word count 1202, final wind down, and after all the names have been spoken, after the caves, the bones, the genomes, the vanished lineages, and the long migrations across the old world, what remains is a quieter image, not a chart, not a timeline, not a family tree with clean branches, just a darkening landscape, somewhere in the deep Pleistocene, where small human groups continue moving under a sky that has seen no cities and heard no written language. The Denisovans are gone as a people. So are many others whose names science may never recover. Their shelters have fallen back into earth. Their fires have cooled into traces too faint to see. Their voices, gestures, fears, and memories have left no direct record. Yet the world was once full of them. It was full of footsteps across frozen ground, hands striking stone, children watching adults work, bodies leaning close against wind, eyes following herds through the distance. It was full of lives that mattered completely to those who lived them, even if time has carried almost everything away. Civilization makes people believe permanence is possible. Walls, books, roads, monuments, and machines all seem to promise that memory can be protected. But the deeper past gives a gentler and more unsettling truth. Most human stories disappear. Most names are lost. Most worlds leave only fragments. And still, something continues. A tool edge in sediment, a tooth in a cave, a trace of DNA in bone dust, a gene carried into the present. A breath taken more easily in high mountain air because an ancient lineage once survived there too. The story of humanity 1 million years ago does not end with triumph. It ends with continuity. Not a straight road, but a long wandering path through danger and change. Some branches vanish, some merge, some leave quiet gifts behind. The past is not behind us in the simple way people imagine. It is underneath us, inside us, and all around us, hidden in landscapes, in bodies, in the fragile luck of survival. The last image is a cave mouth at dusk. The valley below is turning blue with cold. No one speaks from the darkness now, but the stone remembers pressure, the soil remembered presence, the genome remembers contact, and beyond the cave, under the slow stars of a world before civilization, the ancient wind moves over the ground where many kinds of humans once walked, lived, endured, and disappeared.